Chapter 525. The dilapidated temple had a horizontal board on the door, on which the word Red Lotus was written. Ning Ke did not expect that such a remote mountain temple would have an official name. When he helped Sang Sang into the temple and saw the blood-red autumn maple trees in the courtyard, he understood the reason. The rain was dripping and the temple was filled with a slight dampness. Ning Ke found the monks in the temple and took out the banknotes, saying that he would stay here for the night, and that his wife preferred peace and quiet, so she did not want to listen to other sounds. The two monks did not understand at first, and they were not willing to leave the temple in the rain. But when they saw the amount on the banknotes, they suddenly became understanding. The Red Lotus temple was very shabby, and there was nothing valuable. Even the statues of arhats in the main hall were made of mud. They were not as important as the banknotes, so there was no need to care about them. The two monks boiled a pot of water and left some daily necessities for Ning Quebec. They told Ning Ke that there were a few acres of monk fields at the foot of the mountain, and where they would live. Then they left the temple under a broken umbrella. It was still early, but Ning Ke was a little hungry since he did not have anything to eat on the journey. He went to the back kitchen of the temple and tasted a few plates of vegetarian dishes prepared by the monks. He felt that they tasted ordinary, so he took out a big bag of dried meat from his luggage, and pinched 2 handfuls of ginseng roots, throwing them into the pot to make a big pot of meat soup. When the soup cooled down, he carefully fed a small bowl to Sang Sang and soaked his rice with the meat soup. Then he fished out the ginseng fragrant pieces from the pot and threw them outside the threshold. The big black horse smelled the ginseng fragrance and came over curiously. He lowered his head and sniffed the meat, but found that it was not fresh meat, and it was made of ginseng roots instead of whole ginseng. So he walked away disappointedly and went to the maple tree to hide from the rain. Ning Ke was a little annoyed and scolded, "The ginseng and gnomes that 11th brother gave us are almost all gone. If you are still as picky as an old bull, be careful that you will starve on the road." The big black horse ignored him and raised his head to smell the fragrance of the maple tree. He thought proudly that even though he was a fool, he was also a fool of the academy. Even if he did not want to eat the food of the world, he still wanted to pursue the state of eating wind and drinking dew. Sang Sang's illness was a little serious, and the cold aura in her body was very annoying. However, it was not as terrible as the time in Chang, and even though she had an attack. Maybe it was because of her successful cultivation of divine skill, or because she had been soaking in liquor for days. She just looked sick and listless, and she felt tired easily. Ning Ke scooped up another piece of meat, poked it with chopsticks and then mixed it into the rice. Sang Sang took the bowl and ate it with great effort. After drinking half of the liquor today, she suddenly looked much more energetic. "Bear with it. We will reach the Lank Temple in about 4 days." In order to make a fire at night to keep warm, Ning Ke carried 2 large pieces of firewood and sat on the threshold. He lowered his head and chopped. He thought that although the black horse carriage was comfortable, it would inevitably be a little bumpy. If they met a good inn on the road, he should let Sang Sang rest more. Sang Sang lay on the monk bed with the quilt covering her lower body. She looked at Ning Ke, who was busy, and suddenly thought of the days many years ago. At that time it was not her who cooked and chopped firewood at home but him. Feeling her gaze, Ning Ke looked back into the room. He looked at the tired expression on her slightly tanned face and said seriously, "I don't know why the headmaster can't cure your illness, but I believe what he said. The elders in the Lank Temple can definitely cure you, so don't worry." Sang Sang softly nodded. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said with a serious expression, "If anything happens in the Lank Temple, don't pay attention to it, especially the divine skill. You can't use it anymore. You just need to take care of your body." Sang Sang lowered her head in silence and did not respond softly for a long time. Ning Ke knew that this request did not mean anything to her. If he really encountered any danger, she would not care about her body. He could not help but shake his head speechlessly. Just like in the past 16 years, he could never win against his little handmaiden, no matter in any aspect. After resting for a while, Sang Sang felt a little better. She looked at the beautiful maple trees in the temple courtyard through the door, and her eyes revealed a happy expression. Since she was sick, Ning Ke had been paying attention to the slightest change in her expression. He looked at her eyes and felt slightly relieved. He helped her up from the bed and walked to the porch to look at the trees through the rain. The Red Lotus Temple was really dilapidated. Several temple walls had collapsed, and even the stone steps at the main door had not been leveled for many years. Ning Ke really stopped the horse carriage in the courtyard. At this time the autumn rain was bleak and the red maple trees were like fire. The black horse carriage stopped under the maple trees. Ning Ke naturally thought of a poem and recited, Stop and sit in the maple forest at night, the maple leaves are red. He was born early and came early. Many of his memories had long been blurred or even disappeared. There were only some very basic things that were hard to forget. He could not remember much of the poem, but he could not forget the content of the text. However, at this time, he and everyone in the world did not know that he had remembered the frost leaves as maple leaves. He did not finish the poem, because he felt that Sang Sang's thin arm, which he was supporting, had become a little stiff. He looked at her worriedly but did not see her frowning in pain. Instead, he saw a shy and slightly red face. Sang Sang lowered her head and murmured in a very soft voice, "We are not married yet." Ning Ke knew that the little girl had misunderstood the two words in the poem. He could not help but smile bitterly. Then he remembered that many years ago, there seemed to be a little boy in the classroom who used the two words in the poem to flirt with other little girls. He could not help but be slightly startled and felt as if it had been a lifetime ago. However, he did not understand that it was really a lifetime ago. After a moment, he woke up from this rare emotion. He reached out his hand and touched Sang Sang's face, saying, "What's the difference whether we are married or not? You and I can't be separated in this life." Sang Sang raised her head and softly said, "I am worried that there is a difference." Ning Ke was slightly surprised and asked, "What difference can there be?" Sang Sang whispered, "They all say, if we are really together we will not like each other, at least not as much as before." Ning Ke said with slight annoyance, "Where did this come from?" "It's all because of that girl Xiao Xiao. She has nothing better to do than to instill these messy worldviews in you." Sang Sang looked at him and stubbornly asked, "But will we not like each other?" Ning Ke's answer was very natural and without thinking, "Of course not." Sang Sang said, "But Xiao Xiao said, there are many girls in Chang'an who are spoiled by their husbands before marriage. But after they are married they will feel bored after 2 or 3 years. Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, "You have to understand. You have been married to the Ning family since you were born. It has been 16 years since then. Have I ever felt bored? Have you ever felt bored? Since you have not felt bored for so many years, then naturally you will not feel bored in this life. Even if you do feel bored, you will only feel bored when you are together." Sang Sang blushed slightly and said, "Ning Ke, your words are getting better and better." Ning Ke asked with a smile, "Why don't you call me young master?" Sang Sang said, "You can't be young master when we are talking about love." Ning Ke said, "That makes sense." Sang Sang suddenly said, "But you still like other women?" Ning Ke's body shook and he said, "Where? Your Highness? That is the budding of a young man's feelings. He has no sense of direction. If you look deeper, you can probably see the fantasies that all the poor boys in the world have for princesses. Sister Dewdrop? She is the teacher's dish. Don't be so disrespectful." "But you said that you really want to touch and rub her. This is a matter of touch and desire. Are you saying that my touch is not good?" Another one, another one. Where is the calligraphy addict? Ah, the wind is a little strong. Let's go back to the room first. The big black horse, who was originally taking shelter from the rain and practicing self-cultivation under the maple tree, woke up when Ning Ke and Sang Sang began to talk about certain topics. He pricked up his ears and stared at them with his eyes wide open, for fear of missing a word or missing Ning Ke's embarrassment. Seeing that Ning Ke was about to help Sang Sang into the room, the big black horse felt bored and scolded Ning Ke in his heart for being shameless. Suddenly he faintly smelled a very faint smell in the autumn rain. He could not help but raise his head in confusion. Sang Sang looked at the temple gate in the rain and said, "Someone is coming." Ning Ke stood still for a moment and suddenly said, "Get on the carriage." The important luggage was all in the carriage, so there was no need for a coachman. Soon they were ready to leave. The big black horse's mane was wet in the autumn rain, but it was not loose and stuck. It was like a sword stabbing everywhere. It was very irritable at this time, because it confirmed that the faint smell in the rain was the smell of blood. It had never smelled such a strong and extremely cold smell of blood, not even on the battlefield. In the autumn rain came the hurried sound of horse hooves. It should still be under the mountain. It was very far away and could not be heard, but Ning Ke, Sang Sang and the big black horse could hear it very clearly. The black horse carriage drove out of the Red Lotus Temple. Ning Ke lifted the curtain and looked down the mountain. There were no trees in the green mountain, only long wild grass. It was late autumn and the grass was frosty yellow. It was blown down by the rain and the autumn wind. The originally excellent view became clearer. The autumn rain was not dense, but it could not block people's sight. They saw more than 10 black riders moving along the 3 mountain roads at a high speed. The people on the black horses wore black Taoist robes. Their bodies were dark, as if the night had come to this world earlier than the day. It was full of chilling and gloomy atmosphere. These black riders were as fast as lightning. The horses' hooves broke the mud on the road, and the Taoist robes broke the fine rain. Ning Ke looked through the window and remained silent, confirming that it was too late to leave. The big black horse neighed restlessly and kicked the accumulated rain on the ground impatiently, as if it wanted to rush and kill. Sang Sang lowered her head and coughed gently. The black iron bow had already taken shape in her small hand. Ning Ke suddenly asked, "What level?" Sang Sang raised her head, holding the big black umbrella in her right hand. She looked at the black riders through the window and frowned slightly, as if she could not believe her own perception. She said, "All of them are in the see-through state." Then she added, "5 of them are in the upper see-through state, and 1 of them has reached the peak." Ning Ke's face darkened slightly, but his eyes were still calm, just a little puzzled. This is the second chapter. The next chapter may be a little later. I will try to finish it before 1:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 526. Who would harm him? Who would dare to harm him? Ning Ke frowned as he thought of his conversation with Xian Zhilong at Moling Ferry, especially after Sang Sang confirmed the cultivation state of the Black Cavalry. In the unknown places like the academies back of the mountain, or the Jishou Abbey or the Shenkong Temple, the see-through realm was very common. Ning Ke had met many cultivators in the knowing destiny state. But in fact it was very difficult for ordinary cultivators to enter the see-through realm. The masters in the see-through realm in ordinary sects, even if they were not the sect masters, must be extremely important figures. It was impossible for there to be too many of them. Now the dozen black cavalry on the mountain road were all cultivators in the see-through realm, and there were even masters at the peak of the see-through realm. This surprised Ning Quebec. He could not think of anyone else in this area besides the Lank Temple who could have so many masters. Of course, the black cavalry could not be monks from the Lank Temple because they wore black Taoist robes. Moreover, Ning Ke sensed some familiar killing aura from them, so he was sure that they were soldiers, or at least they had lived in a military camp. Could they be from the South Jin Kingdom? Ning Ke's gaze fell on the approaching black cavalry through the window. Suddenly he raised his eyebrows and said, "They are not from the South Jin Kingdom. I smell a disgusting smell." Sang Sang asked, "What smell?" Ning Ke said, "The unique smell of corruption from the West Hill Divine Palace. Even if there is a lot of quietus in their aura, there is still no way to cover up the smell." After confirming the possible origin of the enemy, he no longer hesitated. He took the iron bow and talisman arrow from Sang Sang, pushed open the skylight at the top of the carriage and stood up. The autumn rain continued. Ning Ke pushed open the skylight and stood up. The chilly rain, accompanied by the chilly autumn wind, blew on his face, but it could not change his expression at all. He looked calm, put an arrow on the bow and slowly pulled the bowstring. The iron bow gradually bent, and the bowstring made a squeaking sound, but the bow and the bowstring did not tremble at all. The dark talisman arrow, containing great power, silently rested on the bow. The arrowhead aimed at the black cavalry running at high speed on the mountain path, as if it would be shot in the next moment. The primordial 13 arrows, created by combining the wisdom of the Academy and the resources of the Tang Empire, was undoubtedly the most powerful long-range weapon in the cultivation world in the past century. To some extent, it had even surpassed the flying swords of grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. Magical weapons had their own souls. This iron bow and talisman arrow had once killed Long Qing and injured Yi Hongyu. It was also stained with Xiaoho's blood. At this moment it was ready to be shot. Even the autumn rain around the horse carriage seemed to be afraid and slowed down a bit. There was still a long distance between the temple and the black cavalry on the mountain path. Ning Ke had locked their breaths with the talisman arrow in advance. As a master in the see-through state, the black cavalry should have felt the danger and had great fear. However, what made Ning Ke feel cold was that the black cavalry did not seem to feel the danger at all. They still maintained a complete formation and a murderous aura. The horses' hooves were flying, splashing the mud on the mountain path like flowers, and the layers of rain were constantly broken. Only a truly cold and confident person could do this. The autumn rain gradually became heavier, and the curtain of rain gradually became thicker. The raindrops hit Ning Ke's face one by one, and fell on the dark and sharp arrowhead, but could not shake him and the bow mountain. After the skylight was pushed open, the autumn rain mixed with coldness seeped into the carriage. Before Ning Ke stood up, he used his feet to kick a quilt to cover Sang Sang. However, Sang Sang saw that he did not shoot the talisman arrow for a long time, and knew that something was wrong. She lifted the quilt and stood up. Out of the corner of his eye, Ning Ke looked at her pale little face and her haggard eyebrows. He slightly frowned and said, "Lie down. We'll talk when you can't hold on." He did not say that he did not need her in this battle, because he faintly felt that today's battle would be very dangerous. During the battle, even if it was a white lie, it would bring disaster to both of them. Sang Sang did not listen to him. She stood up with some difficulty, coughed softly and squeezed past him. She stood out of the skylight and opened the big black umbrella with a swoosh. If she really couldn't hold on, then she should open the big black umbrella. The big black umbrella kept the autumn rain outside, and Sang Sang used her sleeves to wipe the rain off Ning Ke's face. This was not the warmth before the battle, but she would not let any small factor affect Ning Ke's battle. Bean-like water droplets kept falling on the thick surface of the black umbrella, making a puffing sound. Ning Ke's face was shrouded in the umbrella's shadow, and looked more and more solemn. After a period of time, more than a dozen black cavalrymen had galloped past the mountainside and would arrive at the temple in a moment. However, Ning Ke did not shoot the talisman arrow because he faintly felt that there was something wrong. The other side seemed to be waiting for him to shoot. The black cavalrymen on the mountain road were very strong, but at this distance, even a master in the see-through realm could not avoid the primordial 13 arrows. Ning Ke had absolute confidence in this, so he was not afraid at all when Sang Sang confirmed the enemy's state. As a person from the academy who entered the human realm, no matter how humble he was, he knew that anyone who dared to kill him must have a full understanding of his fighting methods and style in advance. In other words, the black cavalrymen on the mountain road knew very well that once he shot the arrows they would die. However, they seemed to be fearless, which could only mean that these black cavalrymen were courting death. It was such a difficult thing to cultivate to the see-through realm. Other than faith and true love, what else was worth courting death for? Ning Ke pondered silently. He only knew that these enemies were willing to pay such a terrible price, so they must be covering up the more terrible real killing intent. Holding the big black umbrella in her small hand, Sang Sang suddenly frowned and said, "Someone is coming again?" Ning Ke looked at the approaching black cavalryman on the mountain road and said, "Find him?" Holding the umbrella, Sang Sang's hand trembled slightly. She frowned painfully and said in a low voice, "I'm not sure." Ning Ke squinted his eyes, and a drop of rain slid down his cheek. Even with the cover of the autumn rain, no matter how skillful one's body movement was, it could not avoid Sang Sang's perception. Sang Sang said that she was not sure, which meant one thing. The real hidden enemy was at least a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. The black cavalrymen were approaching, and for the first time Ning Ke and Sang Sang could really hear the sound of hooves like a storm. The big black horse no longer neighed, but just coldly looked at the strong figures of its kind. Its black eyes were bursting with a strong desire to fight and a manic mood of destruction. They could vaguely see the faces of the people on the horses, but Ning Ke was not as agitated as the big black horse. He still maintained a terrible calmness and did not shoot the talisman arrow on the iron bow. The powerhouse in the knowing destiny state hiding in the autumn rain must have hoped that Ning Ke could shoot all the iron arrows in the box. Even if he didn't, the powerhouse in the knowing destiny state would find a chance to kill him when Ning Ke focused on killing the black cavalryman. If he focused on the strong knowing destiny state, he would not be able to stop the black cavalryman from coming to the temple. At that time, the power of the primordial 13 arrows would be greatly reduced. In the case of close combat, Ning Ke did not have much confidence to fight against more than a dozen strong see-through state and a strong knowing destiny state. Or rather, he had no confidence at all. The rain kept hitting the big black umbrella, making muffled sounds. It gradually mixed with the dense hooves not far away, bringing a strange and tense atmosphere to the ruined temple. Sang Sang held the handle of the big black umbrella harder and harder until it trembled. Then she coughed painfully. Her originally dark face became paler and blood dripped from the corner of her mouth. Ning Ke's heart suddenly tightened, but he said nothing and did not stop her. A pure light suddenly flashed in the depths of Sang Sang's glass-like eyes, like lightning. Then she closed her eyes tightly and said two extremely complicated numbers. Ning Ke suddenly turned around. The dark sharp arrowhead left a line of rain in the air. He loosened his index and middle fingers on the iron bowstring. He turned around and shot the arrow. The whole movement was extremely natural and smooth. The iron arrow was aimed at the depths of the Red Lotus Temple behind the horse carriage. There were several trees there, all of which were maple trees. The tip of the arrow was aimed at one of them. The frost leaves were redder than blood. The primordial 13 arrows appeared in the world again. There was no thunder this time, but it quietly sneaked into the autumn rain with the wind. The distance from the skylight of the black horse carriage to the maple tree in the ruined temple was about 100 feet. In the air of 100 feet, there appeared a channel that absolutely rejected other chi of heaven and earth. It was the arrow. A few drops of rain, fortunately or unfortunately, were not shaken away by the chi of heaven and earth carried by the talisman arrow. They stayed in the invisible arrow space and floated alone like shivering orphans. These drops of autumn rain were not broken, and it seemed that they were not actually penetrated. Because the talisman arrow that left the iron bow did not seem to be real. But the iron arrow was still there. When it hit the target. In a flash, the iron arrow shot the maple tree that was waving its red leaves in the autumn rain. It was too slow to describe with any measure of time. The maple tree did not break. The red leaves that floated off the branches were not shaken off by the arrow, but by the rain. Because there was a black peach blossom on the maple tree. The iron arrow just hit the black peach blossom. The peach blossom was pure black, so black that it seemed to be reflecting light. It was so black that it gave people a sense of beauty. It was like the night of the far north wilderness, where one could occasionally see an extremely beautiful and otherworldly luster. But after looking at it for a long time, one would find that the black on the peach blossom was just a simple black. It was extremely pure black. It was the night itself. It was the black abyss shrouded in the night. Black was devouring. This black peach blossom seemed to be able to devour everything in the world. The iron arrow, which contained a terrifying power, disappeared into the black peach blossoms just like that. It was like falling into a bottomless black swamp. There was no trace left. Looking at the black peach blossom and his most powerful attack being annihilated so easily, Ning Kei's eyes did not show any fear. Instead, they became brighter. At the moment when his eyes began to brighten, the second iron arrow had left the bowstring. It shot to the black peach blossom on the maple tree again. This is the third chapter. There will be a fourth chapter, but it will be slower. I will try to finish it before 3:40. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 527. If a stone was thrown into the water, it would not come back, but at least one could see the beautiful ripples on the water. If a dog was thrown with a meat bun, it would not come back, but at least the dog would bark after eating the meat bun. However, the first iron arrow that Ning Kei shot did not have any reaction after entering the black peach blossom. It had been prepared for a long time, and it could even be said to be the most powerful attack to kill. But the enemy easily dissolved it. If it was an ordinary person, he might feel desperate upon seeing such a scene. Ning Kei did not have such a feeling. The powerhouse in the knowing destiny state had been hiding in the dark, trying to distract his attention with the dozens of black cavalries on the mountain road, or to consume the iron arrows in his box. This meant that the person was afraid of the primordial 13 arrows. In this case, this arrow must have been effective. In addition to the rational analysis, what made him still confident was the distinct characteristics of the academy, and the pride and confidence that the longer he stayed with the headmaster of the academy, the more unshakable he became. The primordial 13 arrows were the collective wisdom of the academy. Ning Kei firmly believed that no one in the world could ignore its power. Even superpowerhouses like the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, the great divine priest of West Hill, or second brother could not quietly dissolve the iron arrow. In the spring 2 years ago, the talisman arrow was just made. Ning Kei shot it for the first time and second brother waved his sleeves to block it. His sleeves were almost torn by the iron arrow. Even if the person hiding behind the maple tree was a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state, he was nothing compared to second brother. How could he dissolve the iron arrow so easily? The black peach blossom on the maple tree seemed to swallow the iron arrow like an endless abyss. It did not seem to be affected at all. But Ning Kei was sure that the opponent must have paid the price and been hurt. But he could not see it, but it did not mean that it did not exist. Therefore he did not hesitate and shot the second iron arrow without stopping. The iron arrow broke through the air, shot into the black peach blossom and disappeared again. The trunk of the maple tree, which was wet by the autumn rain, trembled a little. Other than that, there was no other change. Ning Kei looked calm without fear or despair in his eyes. He shot the third iron arrow. The iron arrow disappeared in the black peach blossom again. This time, the wet maple tree shook more violently. Pieces of red leaves fell from the branches and fell to the ground with the autumn wind. Ning Kei shot another arrow. The black peach blossom finally changed. The shapeless black petals condensed from the pure aura of heaven and earth trembled, and the edges of the petals showed signs of withering, as if they were going to fall off together with the red leaves. Ning Ke shot the fifth iron arrow. The sharp arrowhead pierced into one of the petals of the black peach blossom. This time it finally hit its body. An extremely deep crack appeared on one of the petals of the black peach blossom. A loud bang resounded. The black peach blossoms disappeared without a trace. The hard maple tree bore the remaining power of the iron arrow head-on. How could it withstand it? In an instant, a huge hole was blasted in the tree, and with a cracking sound, it was snapped in two. The dense red leaves of the maple tree were shattered into countless shreds by the aura of the arrow. They scattered into the air in the courtyard of the temple, and then were splashed onto the ground by the dense autumn rain. The shreds of maple leaves dyed the autumn rain blood and fell on the ground, on the broken maple tree, on the man behind the maple tree, and on the silver mask on his face. The silver mask covered half of the young man's face. Only half of his face was exposed, but it could still be imagined that he was handsome. However, at this time, his body was stained with blood like rain, and he looked a little miserable. Looking at the man behind the maple tree, Ning Ke and Sang Sang couldn't help showing a shocked expression. In the house by the Yanming Lake, Yi Hongyu had mentioned once intentionally or unintentionally that this man might still be alive. But they did not pay attention to it because even if he was still alive he must have been disabled. However, this man was actually still alive, and he was even more powerful than before. "I can't believe you are still alive." Ning Ke looked at the young man in black Taoist robe in the autumn rain. He could not help but be a little absent-minded as he thought of the continuous fights and hatred with this man over the years. The half of Long Qing's face outside the silver mask was extremely pale, almost without a trace of blood, as if he had not seen the sun for a long time. A very thin trace of blood slowly flowed from the corner of his mouth. Ning Ke did not hesitate and fiercely shot 5 primordial 13 arrows consecutively, and finally left an indelible mark on his natal peach blossom. Of course he was also seriously injured. Long Qing had encountered many adventures, entered the knowing destiny state, defeated many heads of cultivation sects in the world, and strengthened his psyche power with the Grey Eye skill. At this time, there was no doubt that he was at his best stage. He was confident that he could defeat Ning Ke, but he did not expect that he would be injured as soon as they met. He did not expect that Ning Ke would ignore the threat of more than a dozen black cavalrymen and fight with him as if he was gambling with his life. In addition, there was a more important reason. After entering the knowing destiny state, one could really understand the real law of the flow of the aura of heaven and earth. If he wanted to avoid Ning Ke's primordial 13 arrows, there should be a better way. Just like Yi Hongyu who entered the knowing destiny state on the snow cliff. Although she might also be embarrassed, she should be less injured. But Long Qing did not want to hide. The first half of his life was destroyed by an iron arrow. Now that he was reborn, he seemed to be unparalleled in the world. However, the horrible power of the primordial 13 arrows was still a shadow in his Taoist heart. If he could not defeat the primordial 13 arrows, he could not really erase the shadow, and he could not really feel the power of pride. This kind of emotion was so strong, and this kind of desire was so unstoppable that he couldn't restrain his impulse. He wanted to try and see if he could block that iron arrow head-on. He did, and he did block it. Long Qing felt an extremely spicy breath reverberating in his chest, and even his eyes became sore. He looked at Ning Ke on the horse carriage and was about to say something, but his expression suddenly changed. When he saw Long Qing reappear in front of him, Ning Ke was indeed a little absent-minded. If he had time to sigh, he might have many complicated emotions. But he was a professional soldier, a standard fighter, and a woodcutter by the Zhuzhu Lake. Before he was sure that he had killed or completely defeated a powerful enemy, he did not allow himself to have any time to sigh. He thought that it was suicide to be sad at this time. Did they have to bow to each other, ask each other about what happened after they parted, ask about each other's well-being and reminisce about the past before fighting? Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu both looked down on such idiots. In their eyes, Prince Long Qing and many powerful cultivators were all idiots. Since they were idiots, why should they live? Just when Prince Long Qing was feeling emotional, touched, sad and sentimental, and was about to say something to Ning Ke to show his pride and strength, just when his eyes were sore and his lips were about to separate, Ning Ke once again pulled the bow and arrow before he could say a word. His action of pulling the bowstring was so natural, and even showed a natural aura, which made people unprepared and alert in advance, and made people feel that it was inevitable. Long Qing's face became paler, and his black Taoist robe, which had been soaked by the autumn rain, suddenly floated up. He seemed to melt into the autumn scenery in the temple garden. Obviously, one could see where he was, but it always gave people a feeling that when the iron arrow came he would not be there. With a deep understanding of the circulation of the aura of heaven and earth, one could integrate oneself with nature, and use the power of nature to fight. This was the real meaning of the knowing destiny state. The blood-colored fragments floated in the wind, as if covering Long Qing's body without a trace. Ning Ke looked calm without a trace of uneasiness. Holding the big black umbrella, Sang Sang looked at the erratic figure of Prince Long Qing in the courtyard of the temple, and gave him a direction. Ning Ke loosened the bowstring and the arrow shot out. The distance between the inside and outside of the temple was not far. The maple tree had been destroyed, and the autumn rain had stopped, and the black peach blossoms had faded. This iron arrow perfectly released all the power of the primordial 13 arrows. The air in the temple fluctuated, and the chi of heaven and earth suddenly became chaotic. Several invisible black peach blossoms appeared from nothingness, and with a thought, they blocked in front of Long Qing. These black peach blossoms were rather small and not his natal peach blossoms. Instead, they were his ultimate defensive skill. Back in the wasteland, it was these peach blossoms that allowed him to avoid a crushing defeat in front of Tang Xiaodong's unreasonable blood saber. Now that Long Qing had entered the knowing destiny state, the defense of these peach blossoms was even more amazing. They contained extremely rich and pure chi of heaven and earth, and attached with a frightening sense of silence. However, after all, they were not natal peach blossoms. The peach blossoms bloomed. The arrow arrived. The peach blossoms fell one after another. The black petals broke and then turned into green smoke, disappearing in the autumn rain. The iron arrow moved forward and came in front of Long Qing. Long Qing's face showed a shocked expression, and then it all turned into coldness and cruelty. Coldness and cruelty to others and himself. He used his chest to meet the iron arrow. There was a puff. The iron arrow pierced through the black Taoist robe. It shot through Long Qing's body. It shot through the broken back wall of the temple. Then it shot into the rain and no one knew where it flew. There was a hole in Long Qing's chest. Standing in front of him, one could see the scenery behind him. It was not beautiful but very scary. Anyone who had a hole in his body that could see the scenery should not be alive. Long Qing was still alive because the hole in his chest was not pierced at this time, but a long time ago on the snow cliff, when Ning Ke shot through it from dozens of miles away. Since then the hole had always been there. Today's iron arrow had flown through the arrow hole from back then. So he did not die. However, the strong aura attached to the iron arrow still tore the internal organs in the hole. Long Qing bent over and coughed violently. Every time he coughed there was blood. Ning Ke had already taken out the 7th iron arrow and was pulling the bow. His fingers on the bowstring were no longer stable and slightly trembled. He knew that this was the best chance. It might also be his last chance today. Long Qing suddenly raised his head. His eyes were indifferent. Deep in the indifference was the wild fire of hatred. This is the 4th chapter and I will definitely continue to write it. At this time I will go and lie down for 2 or 3 hours. Recently my biological clock has been very good and I am sleepy. I will get up after 6 o'clock. Don't worry that I can't get up. I have something on my mind. I will start writing after breakfast. I will try to finish this large plot before evening, and try to make everyone happy. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 528. In the autumn rain, the Red Lotus Temple on the Green Mountain suddenly became solemn. Long Qing waved his sleeves in the rain. His sleeves danced lightly and the wind and rain blew. This flick contained his absolute fury. This anger came from the arrow hole in his chest, the years of humiliation, pain and despair. It was also because of the huge gap between the beginning of today's battle and his imagination. In his imagination he was gifted with unique skills, inherited the amazing cultivation of the Halfman Taoist, and had entered the knowing destiny state with the help of the heavenly power pill. Moreover, he was far from an ordinary knowing destiny state cultivator. Today when he returned to the world he should walk out and defeat Ning Ke easily, making this enemy who had brought him endless darkness fall into despair. However, who would have thought that from the beginning of the battle, he had always been at a disadvantage. To be exact, he had been in a passive and humble position without any chance to fight back. His domineering cultivation of the knowing destiny state had not been shown at all, and he had been seriously injured. After dodging 6 primordial 13 arrows by a hair's breadth, there was still 1 arrow on the iron bowstring. After 7 arrows, Long Qing was suppressed to the point of suffering. He was humiliated to the extreme but also angry to the extreme. This seemingly simple flick of the sleeve contained the anger that had been suppressed for a long time and the fighting spirit that had been suppressed to the extreme. Once it was unleashed, its power was astonishing. The rain on the broken stone steps of the Red Lotus Temple was suddenly swept away. Countless water droplets were swept into the sleeve wind and then attacked the black carriage wantonly. The majestic and violent chi of heaven and earth, mixed with the rain, seemed to be no slower than the primordial 13 arrows. Every drop of rain seemed to have become a feather arrow or a hard stone. What made Ning Kai feel inexplicably scared was that the water droplets that were rushing toward him seemed to be painted with a touch of light black under the clear light of the rain, revealing a strange sense of danger. Ning Kai groaned and shot the 7th iron arrow. Then he pushed Sang Sang into the horse carriage as fast as he could. At this time, the sky full of black rain was in front of him. He only had time to move the big black umbrella in front of him. The sky full of rain, like dense arrows, hit the surface of the big black umbrella. There was also a lot of rainwater hitting the side walls of the carriage. The black carriage trembled violently as if it could flip over at any time. It looked like a small boat in the middle of the ocean, looking extremely frail and pitiful. The black rain was so dense that the big black umbrella could not completely block it no matter how big it was. Ning Kai did not notice that a few drops of rain floated into the carriage through the gap and fell on Sang Sang. He gripped the handle of the umbrella tightly, the joints of his right hand slightly pale, and blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. It had nothing to do with the black rain. It was because he had forcefully shot the 7th iron arrow. Because he was in too much of a hurry, and because he was slightly afraid of the black rainwater, this arrow did not hit Long Qing's body. The primordial 13 arrows consumed a lot of psyche power. When it was first developed, Second Brother once said that Ning Kai could only shoot a few arrows before he became weak. His current state of strength was far better than it was in the past, and he could have shot all 13 arrows. However, he shot 7 arrows in a row today without any pause in between, nor did he have a chance to rest and recover. It was like 7 consecutive lightning strikes in the rain clouds. Such a high-frequency and high-density shooting was a very terrifying thing. Even when he was fighting against Xia Ho at Yanming Lake last winter, he had never done this. Fortunately, his cultivation of the Great Spirit gradually strengthened his body after joining the devil. Otherwise, Ning Kai would collapse after shooting 7 iron arrows in a row. At this time, the muscles on his arm were still seriously injured, and there was a sharp pain in his right shoulder joint. It would be difficult for him to pull the iron bow in a short period of time. What chilled and shocked Prince Long Qing the most was not the power of Ning Kai's primordial 13 arrows, nor was it Ning Kai's strong means and willpower in the battle. It was because he knew very well what kind of person his opponent was. He just could not understand why Ning Kai's 6th iron arrow could hit him. If he had not humiliated himself by using the hole in his chest to avoid the arrow, he might have been seriously injured or even killed. However, he had already entered the realm of fighting in the knowing destiny state, and his whole body had become one with the surrounding nature. Ning Kai's cultivation was only in the see-through state. How could he have been able to capture him? Long Qing found that Ning Kai still had many secrets. Perhaps those secrets were not with him but around him. For example, the little handmaiden who held the big black umbrella earlier. Long Qing looked at Ning Kai's wet but unchanged face. He said with a slightly strange expression, "You really are a monster." Ning Kai looked at Long Qing who stood behind the stone steps and looked at the hole in his chest. He said, "You are a monster." Long Qing walked down the stone steps and said expressionlessly, "You are the same." Ning Kai said, "You are welcome." Long Qing said, "This time I will not be polite. It is your turn to die." Ning Kai said, "Why do you say so?" Long Qing looked at the iron bow in his hand and asked with a smile, "Can you still shoot?" Ning Kai's heart gradually turned cold, but the smile on his face was more sincere. He said, "A gentleman has nothing to fight for, so he must shoot." Long Qing said, "My people have arrived. If you can still shoot then, please shoot." Ning Kai's smile gradually stiffened. Long Qing's expression became more and more elegant. In the autumn rain, the dozen or so black cavalries on the mountain road finally arrived in front of the Red Lotus Temple. 7 consecutive arrows were shot like 7 lightning bolts. At this time, only a short period of time had passed since Sang Sang shouted Long Qing's position. Could be imagined how amazing the speed of these black cavalries was. Ning Kai's cultivation was at the peak of the see-through state. Even if he was really invincible below the knowing destiny state, even if he had other powerful skills besides the primordial 13 arrows, and even had the confidence to defeat ordinary cultivators in the knowing destiny state, It was impossible for him to defeat Prince Longqing, who had entered the knowing destiny state, and the dozen or so see-through state masters alone when Sang Sang was seriously ill. He could not even escape from their siege. At this time the enemy could not be sure that he really could not shoot again. So Longqing did not make a move, but waited vigilantly for an opportunity. However, even if he could find an opportunity to recover and shoot again, he did not know where to shoot. If he still tried to kill Longqing, how could he resist the ferocious fallen knights that were coming soon? The outcome of this battle seemed to be unchangeable and hopeless. However, at this moment, the stiff smile on Ning Kei's face suddenly became lively, like a land that had been dry for a long time suddenly being moistened by a cool mountain spring. Longqing noticed the change in his expression, and his heart trembled slightly. The cold autumn rain kept pouring on the big black horse's head, but it could not extinguish the irritation and fighting desire in its eyes. However, just as the smile on Ning Kei's face changed, the irritation in the big black horse's eyes suddenly disappeared. It looked at the black cavalrymen who were rushing towards the horse carriage with an extremely disdainful expression, as if it was looking at a group of idiots. The fallen knight in the front began to silently activate his psyche power. His right hand left the reins and began to pinch the sword formula. The flying sword in the scabbard on his back began to buzz. The black horse on his back panted quickly and excitedly. The long hair on the horse's neck kept flying in the rain with the final acceleration of the sprint, which looked full of power and beauty. At this moment, a strand of hair floated up. This scene was extremely subtle and not easy to notice, so it did not attract anyone's attention. Prince Longqing's expression changed dramatically and he shouted a warning. However, the black knights were sprinting at a high speed. Even if the fallen knights understood his warning and had enough discipline to carry out his orders, they could not retreat. They could not retreat from this battlefield. This was the battlefield that Ning Kei had arranged. The black horse that was sprinting at the front stepped heavily into the muddy ground and was the first to rush up the Qingling Hill. But it could not continue because its hooves were broken. Then a thin red line appeared on the thick neck of the horse. More fine red lines appeared on the strong body of the horse. Because of the uneven strength exerted on different parts of the body, the red lines gradually widened and then separated. The entire body of the horse became countless pieces of meat floating in the air, and there was vaguely blood between the pieces of meat. The horse's head at the front quietly separated from the body and continued to float forward. One could even see the hot mist coming out of the horse's nose and hear its panting. A sprinting horse had become countless pieces of meat in the midst of sprinting. This scene was extremely strange. The fallen knight on the horse had almost the same experience. His right hand left the reins. Just as he pinched the sword formula and unsheathed his flying sword, there was a deep cut on it and it quietly broke into two. A thin red line appeared on his fingers that pinched the sword formula. His fingers were like ripe fruits, falling one after another. Then, his forearm was cut into countless pieces, and then into even finer pieces of meat. His neck was cut off. His whole body was cut in the middle and then cut into even finer pieces. Then, together with the horse that had been cut into pieces, he fell from mid-air. It was like a collapsing glacier. Just a moment ago, it was a master in the see-through realm and a handsome warhorse. The next moment, it became two piles of meat on the Qingling Hill. Hearing Prince Longqing's warning, Zmo, as the strongest among the fallen knights, was the first to react. He felt the strange and horrible aura in the autumn rain. He almost instinctively pulled the reins again and forcibly stopped the warhorse at the cost of suffocation. The horse let out a long and painful neigh and stood up like a human, but its body continued to move forward uncontrollably. Zmo let out a muffled groan and flew off the horse's back, falling heavily on the wet muddy ground. Then both of his feet stepped on the muddy ground and he desperately retreated backwards. Looking at the autumn rain in front of him, his pale face revealed a look of horror. I slept for more than 2 hours, got up at 6:38 and wrote until now. I'm so sleepy. I'll write the next chapter and try to finish it before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 529. At this moment, the group of fallen knights showed the true level of a see-through realm master, especially the absolute importance of being cold and calm in battle. These fallen knights did not know what kind of danger was hidden in the black carriage in the autumn rain. But when Longqing's warning sounded, everyone except the knight who rushed at the front made the quickest and most correct reaction, just like Zmo. They abandoned their horses and crawled on the wet ground. They grabbed the ground with their hands and kicked their legs, desperately running away from the black carriage. They seemed to be able to do anything as long as they could put some distance between themselves and the black carriage. Even so, these fallen knights did not completely avoid the damage. Several horses that were running too fast rushed into the autumn rain and were cut into pieces by the invisible force in the rain. Some of the knights' boots were shredded by invisible lines, while others had their entire calves cut off. The cut was smooth as if there were white eyes in a red circle, which made them look even more disgusting. Miserable howls resounded in the autumn rain. Those invisible lines in the air seemed to have a mind of their own as they chased after and cut through everything. Zmo quickly retreated in the rain. He grabbed two of his slightly injured companions and threw them backwards with all his might. Just by delaying for a moment, the armor on his body had a few scratches that looked like it had been corroded. It seemed like it was about to collapse at any moment. He groaned and unsheathed his flying sword. It contained the pure chi of heaven and earth and flew in front of him. Light and shadow flashed, colliding with the invisible cutting force in the rain many times. The bright flying sword dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was very serious for a cultivator to have his natal flying sword dimmed and damaged. However, Zmo could not care so much at this time. He used the time gained by his natal sword to retreat at a high speed. He did not know how far he had retreated, but he successfully left the black carriage and the dangerous autumn rain. Then he hurriedly called his flying sword back. A fallen commander at the upper level of the see-through realm was at the rear of the Black Knights. He was not affected by the invisible cutting power in the autumn rain. He just looked at the horses that were smashed into pieces when they rushed into the autumn rain. He looked at the strange bloody lines and deep wounds on his companions' bodies. He listened to his companions' painful groans. His face became extremely ugly. He was extremely angry and unwilling. He screamed and the flying sword came out of the scabbard. It turned into a green light with a black edge. It suddenly penetrated the layers of autumn rain and stabbed at the black carriage in the depths of the autumn rain. However, as soon as it entered the autumn rain, or more accurately, as soon as it entered the layers of autumn rain around the black carriage, the flying sword could no longer maintain its power. It instantly became dim, and a layer of rust appeared on its surface, as if it had withstood the effects of being washed by the rain for decades. Then there were many small scratches on the rusty surface of the flying sword. It looked like it was cracking. With a bang, the flying sword fell in the rain about 30 feet away from the black carriage and could no longer move. It was like a dead insect that could only be soaked in the rain until it rotted. The fallen commander's face suddenly turned pale when his natal flying sword was destroyed. He spat out a mouthful of blood. The cold rain flowed down from Zemo's hair and dripped into his eyes. He looked at the autumn rain in front of him. Even when he was expelled from the divine hall and his cultivation was destroyed by Yi Hongyu, his eyes were still firm. Finally, fear appeared in his eyes. The autumn rain was like a cold winter. It was just an autumn rain, layers upon layers of rain, heavy rain. It fell quietly, washing away the frosty weeds, washing away the blood on the carriage and the ground. There was nothing in the rain, but it was as if there were countless of the thinnest and sharpest steel wires, silently waiting to cut apart anything that dared to enter the autumn rain, whether it was a horse, a person, or a sword. The cause of all this was not the autumn rain itself, but the quiet black carriage in the rain. Looking at the black carriage and Ning Kei in it, Zemo's face became paler. He felt that the black carriage and the person in it did not belong to this real world, but came from the netherworld. Seeing his most powerful and loyal subordinate seriously injured by the autumn rain, Long Qing's eyes suddenly became cold. He did not want to guess whether Ning Kei could still shoot the primordial 13 arrows. The psyche power in his sense of perception suddenly surged out, mobilizing the chi of heaven and earth around the temple, turning it into his own aura and directly attacking the black carriage. The aura was full of destructive energy with a sense of quietus. It seemed to have its own color, which was black. However, this seemingly powerful aura disappeared in the autumn rain around the black carriage. At least it disappeared in Long Qing's spiritual world. He lost contact with that aura, causing his sense of perception to be shaken violently. He could not help but turn pale and his body slightly swayed. The invisible cutting power in the autumn rain could actually cut the purest aura. Long Qing suddenly thought of a certain kind of talisman in the legends, the kind of talisman that could even cut space when it was cultivated to the extreme. He could not help but change his expression slightly. Jing Fu. Long Qing looked at Ning Kei with his cold eyes full of shock and faint hunger that made people's hearts palpitate. He was like a beggar who had been hungry for more than 10 days and suddenly saw a white bun in a shabby temple. He did not care whether there was blood or dust on the bun. He just wanted to eat the bun into his stomach. You actually learned Uncle Yen says Jing Fu. It seems that you have made great progress in the past 2 years. Jing Fu was Ning Kei's most powerful talisman. When used by him, its power was even close to that of a divine talisman. However, using Jing Fu was also a very heavy burden on his state. At this time, his face seemed to be even paler than Long Qing's. He forced a smile and said, I don't know where you have been hiding in the past 2 years. Maybe you have been locked in the dark prison. Maybe you have encountered some adventure. Anyway, you have been away from this world for too long, so you are a little behind the times. You don't know my current legend. I can forgive your ignorance. Long Qing said indifferently, however, the battle has just begun, and you have already revealed your most powerful trump card. I am very curious about what made you make such an unwise choice. Did I give you too much pressure? I thought that disciples of the academy were already the most narcissistic people in the world. I did not expect to see you again today. However, your question is really stupid. Even a tiger should use all its strength to fight a rabbit. Since it is a battle, of course you should use the most powerful means from the beginning. This is the truth that even those girls who only know how to write in a daze understand. The girls in Ning Kei's words naturally referred to the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan. When they were traveling in the wilderness, he had taught her the fighting attitude of a tiger fighting a rabbit. Being ridiculed as an idiot by Ning Kei, Long Qing was not angry. He looked at him and asked calmly, what should we do next? Ning Kei said, if you don't want to fight anymore, you can leave first. I have no objection. Long Qing smiled and said, you must die today. Ning Kei looked at the autumn rain and said, you can try to kill me. Long Qing also looked at the autumn rain and felt the looming sharp talisman intent in the rain. His smile was a little indifferent and a little cynical. Jing Fu was indeed powerful and horrifying. Even he could not crack it. However, the biggest feature or weakness of talisman Taoism was that it could not maintain the power of talisman forever. As time went by, with the wind, snow, rain, dew, frost, and snow in nature, it would gradually fade until it finally disappeared. Long Qing put his right hand behind his back and pointed at the cold autumn rain with his left hand. He said with a smile, when the rain stops, the talisman disappears and the blue sky reappears, it will be the time of your death. Ning Kei did not say anything. This made Long Qing feel a little dissatisfied. He seriously repeated, you can't escape today. Ning Kei said, since I knew that the person who came was you, I never thought of escaping. Long Qing was slightly stunned and asked, why? Do you think there will be a fateful battle between us? Ning Kei said with a slight mockery, I really don't know what you saw growing up in the palace of the Yen Kingdom. How can there be so many fates in the world? The reason why I don't escape, of course, is because there is no need to escape. Don't forget, you are my defeated opponent. You have never defeated me. I see. Long Qing sighed with some mixed emotions and smiled with some pain and sadness. He said, can you still be my opponent now? As I said, I don't know what happened to you in the past 2 years, and what adventures you have encountered. But it is impossible for me to be afraid of you. As long as it is you, I believe that I will not fail and I will not die. Ning Kei looked at Prince Long Qing and said, because this is my story. In my story, characters like you can only be used as a foil to me. In the carriage, Sang Sang was installing something on the remaining iron arrows in the box. Hearing Ning Kei's words, her fingers slightly stiffened and she asked, do you really think so? The rain covered Ning Kei's slight voice. I am not youngest uncle nor second brother. Of course I will not think so. And I think the people in this world who are most like the hero of the story do not have a good ending. Then why do you say so? Because I don't like him. So even if I can't beat him, I want to disgust him to death. Ning Kei glanced at Sang Sang and said, you know why I don't like him? Sang Sang was a little ashamed and explained, I don't like him now. And at that time, I just thought he was good looking and wanted to look at him more. Ning Kei said coldly, at least I used to like him. Even if it was his face, it was still like. The autumn rain was cold and the talisman was fierce. The blood gradually faded and the howling became lower. The atmosphere in front of the Red Lotus Temple was still tense and even suffocating. However, at this time, Ning Kei and Sang Sang were still in the mood to hide in the black horse carriage and whisper about the old scores. Long Qing was silent. At this time, Jing Fu landed in the autumn rain beside the black horse carriage. He and the fallen knights could not get close, but Ning Kei could not take the opportunity to escape. No matter how powerful the talisman was, it would eventually disappear. Long Qing understood that Ning Kei was trying to delay time and recover as soon as possible. So after a little thought, he sat down on the wet stone steps, closed his eyes and began to meditate to heal his internal injuries. This was a moment of peace in the battle. This was a temporary break in the autumn rain. Continue after lunch. I started last night and slept for more than 2 hours. This is the 6th chapter. Let's see how much I can write in total. It's a pleasure of self-torture. I am S&M. Please continue to support the monthly votes. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 530. The fallen knights supported each other and retreated to a place not far away. They began to bandage their wounds and rest. The fear in their eyes when they looked at the black horse carriage gradually disappeared, replaced by vigilance and hatred. They had come from the mountain road like a thunderbolt, but they were forced to retreat before they could even touch the black horse carriage. They also paid the heavy price of the death of one of their companions and the serious injuries of several others. For them who were in the see-through state, this was an unbearable shame. The autumn rain continued. The Red Lotus Temple was covered with frost leaves and the horse carriage was wet. Ning Ke had already sat back in the carriage and covered the skylight. He looked at Long Qing through the window and suddenly asked, "Hey, how did you come back to life?" Long Qing slowly opened his eyes and looked at him. He said indifferently, "That's a long story." Ning Ke looked at the autumn rain and said, "If the story is too long, I may not be able to finish it. Only when the well talisman still existed could one tell the story and listen to the story. Once the well talisman disappeared, the person who told the story and listened to the story would return to their original identity, the sworn enemy." The well talisman in the autumn rain was no longer so horrible at this moment. Instead, it brought a temporary peace or balance to the meeting place. I wore a mask, but you could recognize me at a glance and were so interested in my story. In those years, there was a legend in the cultivation world that you and I were destined to be enemies for life. It seems that it makes sense, Prince Long Qing said expressionlessly. In this case, I naturally can't allow you, Mr. 13 of the Academy, to shine in the cultivation world alone. So I came back. Ning Ke said sarcastically, "Don't think that just because you have entered the knowing destiny state, you can put on a show and make me bow down to you. You know, there are not many people in the knowing destiny state in our place. They are like cabbages all over the mountains and plains." Long Qing said calmly, "I am not an ordinary knowing destiny state. I believe you should have felt it." Ning Ke did feel a very strange and even a little horrible aura from Long Qing, which was much stronger than ordinary knowing destiny state cultivators. But he just smiled and said, "Not ordinary cabbages after all, they are still cabbages." Then the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Looking at the silver mask on Long Qing's face, he frowned and asked, "What happened to you?" Long Qing began to tell the story of what had happened to him over the years. This was a very long story, but it was outlined very clearly by him in the simplest language. Just by listening to a few key words, one could feel the strangeness, cruelty, and even tragedy of this story. His voice was calm and emotionless, as if he was telling someone else's story. In fact, he did not want to tell others about this, but Ning Ke had a special meaning to him, so he wanted Ning Ke to know what he had lost and what he had regained before he died. This was a spiritual need. The fallen knights roughly knew what had happened to the priest, but they did not know these details. Listening to the voice coming from the autumn rain, they listened silently and attentively, occasionally moved. "It's a good story, but it's a bit cliché." Ning Ke's comment was cold and even harsh. Long Qing didn't care. "I don't believe in the theory of fated enemies. Of course, I also don't believe that after you've been through so much and come back to the world, you will take revenge for all the humiliation you've suffered." Ning Ke said, "Because the two biggest humiliation you've suffered were from me. If I let you take revenge for all these things, how can I live?" Long Qing said, "Since it's death, why should a dead person care about how to live?" Ning Ke said, "I won't die." Long Qing said, "I'm the person chosen by Haotian. I'm the one chosen by heaven. I won't die, so you must die." Ning Ke looked at his calm expression and suddenly felt a little cold. He remembered what second brother had once asked Lu Yiqing. He smiled and said, "How can you prove it?" "There's no way to prove Haotian's will, and there's no need to prove it to mortals." Long Qing's answer was very boring. Ning Ke looked at him with a mocking expression. Long Qing said, "I've taken the heavenly power pill. Is this proof?" "Is the heavenly power pill rare?" Ning Ke asked. Long Qing nodded very seriously. Ning Ke looked at him and laughed, saying, "I've taken it a few years ago. His smile was very mean. His voice was very cold. I can also tell you that Chin Pippi has a lot of heavenly power pills in his hands. If we want, we can eat them like fried beans. What does this prove? That we are the illegitimate children of Hao Yin? Long Qing could not help changing his expression, even though he knew that there must be something wrong with this sentence. Presently his state of mind was calm like water and cold like ice. It was even to the extent that he was on the verge of the emotionless and senseless Grand Supreme Realm. However, after being repeatedly ridiculed and slapped in the face by Ning Ke, the irritation in his heart gradually grew stronger. Ning Ke continued, "You led a group of fallen knights and your hands are stained with blood. You were chased by the West Hill Divine Palace. Don't you think it's ridiculous to say that you are a person of heaven's mandate? It's just a mental torture." After a moment of silence, Long Qing said, "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not a person of heaven's mandate, but the son of Yama. That's why I have suffered so much in this life. But I can always see hope in the darkest time, and may eventually sink to the bottom of the endless abyss." Hearing this, Ning Ke was slightly shocked, but the smile on his face became more and more sarcastic. "Your Highness, you've really been away from this world for too long. You actually don't know the most widespread rumor now." Long Qing frowned slightly and asked, "What rumor?" Ning Ke pointed at himself and said, "Everyone thinks that I'm the son of Yama. It's said that Yama has tens of thousands of children. Of course, only one is projected into our world, which represents disaster and destruction. It's not a dazzling image." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "But you even want to compete with me for such a title? Your Highness, you are too competitive and too arrogant. Moreover, your arrogance is fake because you still care about how the world looks at you. Back then, you lost to me repeatedly and suffered humiliation in the cold eyes of the world. Therefore, the reason you reappeared in the world this time is not only to kill me, but also to regain the respect of the world. If you don't get respect, you don't even hesitate to let the world fear you because these strong emotions are the spiritual pillars that support you to live until now. In order to achieve this goal, you need a shocking background. Unfortunately, even if you can kill me, you can't surpass me in this aspect because my teacher is the headmaster of the academy. Even if you are accepted as a disciple by the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey, you are still inferior to me because your teacher will never be able to defeat my teacher. In order to restore your confidence and seriously damaged glory, in order to regain the respect of the world, you hungrily make yourself stronger and stronger. You constantly hypnotize yourself, trying to make yourself believe that you're really a person of heaven's mandate. Unfortunately, Haoyin Taoism's intolerance has shaken your confidence in this aspect. So you turn to the dark night, wishing that Yama could sleep with your mother." Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head, saying, "You're already crazy." Long Qing said, "How can a dying man be qualified to judge me?" Ning Ke said, "I may not be qualified, but what about the headmaster of the academy?" Long Qing was silent. Ning Ke said, "When you and I climbed the mountain together and participated in the examination for the second floor of the academy, what words did you see on the wooden door?" Long Qing narrowed his eyes slightly. Of course, he remembered the 4 words written on the stone, but he didn't want to remember them. Ning Ke said, "A gentleman doesn't fight." This is the headmaster of the academy's reminder or warning to you. If you always want to fight with others, how can you not lose? If you always want to fight with heaven, how can heaven tolerate you? Long Qing looked into his eyes and asked, "If heaven can't tolerate you, will you fight or not?" Ning Ke said, "I will fight when it's time to fight." Long Qing said, "Then why can't I fight?" Ning Ke said matter-of-factly, "How can you be compared with me? Don't always think about fighting with me. You can't possibly win against me. The more you fight, the worse you will lose." Long Qing smiled calmly and indifferently. Just when he was about to continue to say something, Ning Ke suddenly opened the skylight and stood up. He glanced at the rain falling from the sky and felt the gradually fading talisman intent in the rain. He said, "Don't talk so much nonsense." Long Qing frowned slightly and wondered who was talking nonsense. In the carriage, Sang Sang put the modified small iron cylinder on the remaining 5 iron arrows in the box. She silently thought that her young master was indeed the most talkative person in the world. Long Qing raised his hand and pointed to the depths of the autumn rain. He said, "Your Jingfu is still there." Ning Ke held the iron bow with his left hand and said, "Idiot, since it's my Jingfu, how can it work on me?" Long Qing smiled and said, "Then why haven't you moved?" Ning Ke said, "Because I need to rest or I really can't pull the bow." Long Qing asked, "Have you rested well?" Ning Ke said, "I feel refreshed, full of energy and full of energy." Long Qing said, You don't need to talk when you rest. With the Jing Fu you don't need to talk to stall for time. Why did you talk so much before and it seemed to be from your heart? Of course those words are from my heart. Ning Ke reached out to take the iron arrow from Sang Sang. He looked at Long Qing and said, I am going to kill you, and I sincerely hope that your last time in this world is also very unpleasant. Long Qing's face was slightly cold. Ning Ke pulled the bow and arrow. Without any nonsense he shot an arrow at him. Long Qing knew his shameless and cold-blooded fighting style very well. He seemed to be talking calmly but in fact he had been silently preparing for the next battle. The seemingly unexpected arrow had long been expected by him. He was fully prepared and even calmer than when he took Ning Ke's iron arrow before he was injured. He flicked his sleeves and the chi of heaven and earth in front of the ruined temple was in chaos, and the peach blossom reappeared. The black peach blossom seemed to receive the arrow effortlessly. Long Qing's figure blended into the autumn rain, and like a ghost he swept past the arrow. Then it was a terrifying counterattack from a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state. However, at this moment, the iron arrow that pierced the black peach blossom exploded. When I wrote the last few sentences, I suddenly thought of a chapter in The Vermilion Bird. It was many years ago. I like this kind of feeling very much. It is scattered and free. If you also like it, please continue to vote for me. I will continue to write and I plan to finish this part of the plot. I really don't know when I will finish it. While I am not dizzy, I should speed up and try to finish the next chapter before 4 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 531. The iron arrow exploded violently, and the black peach blossoms in the rain were blown apart. The scales on the small iron cylinder whistled and shot toward Long Qing's body. Long Qing screamed angrily and forced all his cultivation out of his body. In the autumn rain, the chi of heaven and earth was summoned and turned into countless transparent shields, layer by layer, in front of him. The invisible chi of heaven and earth shield was not a real metal shield, and Long Qing was not a powerful cultivator at the peak of martial arts. Although the whistling metal pieces were weakened by the chi of heaven and earth shield, they still cut his black Taoist robe into pieces, and blood flowed from the tiny wounds. What was more terrifying was the flame and the scorching air wave caused by the explosion itself. At that moment, the rain in front of the Red Lotus Temple was brightly illuminated, and then quickly burned into white mist, making a squeaking sound. At the moment of the explosion, Long Qing changed the direction of his ghostly figure. He tiptoed on the wet ground, and with the natural flow of the chi of heaven and earth and the driving force of the airwave, he floated backward from the temple gate to the dilapidated main hall, and his body slammed into the clay statue of the Luohan. Smoke and dust filled the air, and the statue of the Luohan was broken into several pieces. A mouthful of blood spurted from his lips, and the emotions in his eyes were extremely complicated, for he could not understand many things that happened today. Talking about the heavenly mandate realm in Yama with Ning Ke was actually a way for him to buy time. However, he clearly saw the black rain fall on Ning Ke's body. But why was Ning Ke still as usual after such a long time? There was no sign of poisoning at all. What was most incomprehensible was that the second floor of the academy developed a weapon like the primordial 13 arrows, which could help Ning Ke fight against the knowing destiny state. It was already unimaginable, but now the academy could add that little explosive thing to the primordial 13 arrows. Was the academy going to go against heaven? Long Qing supported the broken statue of the Luohan and stood up with difficulty. He looked at the looming black horse carriage outside the temple with hatred, and let out a very cold scream. However, the next moment his scream suddenly stopped, because the second iron arrow had arrived. Then there was another explosion. Then came the third arrow and the fourth arrow. Explosions occurred one after another. The walls and beams of the temple collapsed, and the statues of the arhats turned into powder. The flames ignited the dirty yellow curtains and the fallen wooden beams. Suddenly the fire rose to the sky. The entire Red Lotus Temple was ablaze, illuminating the somewhat gloomy world in the autumn rain. A pained howl like that of a wild beast suddenly resounded out from within the burning temple. The howl was filled with rage, ruthlessness, resentment, slaughter, and various other negative emotions, and it caused others to have the urge to cover their ears. Sparks flew and were extinguished by the autumn rain. Long Qing walked out. His body was charred all over and he looked extremely miserable. The blood that flowed out of his wounds was evaporated by the scorching heat waves, giving off a foul stench. The silver mask on his face had disappeared, revealing half of his face that was originally covered. That half of her face was red and swollen like a peach. It was not an old wound but a new one. Long Qing's natal black peach blossom protected his body. At the most dangerous moment, he released a domineering aura and isolated the real fire outside his body. However, he could not isolate the heat and the transfer of temperature. Silver is one of the most conductive metals. Therefore, the half of his face under the silver mask was burned the most severely. This was not the heaviest injury on his body, but it was the most horrifying injury. A few years ago he was shot by Ning Ke on the snow cliff of the wilderness with an arrow. After that, he was like a walking corpse, a beggar, and acted in second-rate romantic dramas. He suffered all kinds of disdain and torture from the world. However, Long Qing's handsome face was still unharmed. Only a few more scars did not damage his beauty, but added to his charm. Now that he had finally regained great power, he did not expect to suffer such a heavy blow soon after he stepped into the world again. His face was finally ruined. It was the whimsical idea of the disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy to turn the primordial 13 arrows into exploding primordial 13 arrows. It had just been developed by Sixth Brother not long ago, so Ning Ke did not bring many with him. Therefore he decided to save these 5 arrows for the most appropriate time. In the beginning he thought that even if he could not kill Long Qing with 7 iron arrows, he could at least seriously injure him. However, he did not expect that Long Qing was still alive when the arrow box was empty and there was only 1 iron arrow on the string. What chilled Ning Ke even more was that he had thought that Long Qing, whose face had been destroyed, would be furious and unable to keep his cool. However, when Long Qing walked out of the burning Red Lotus Temple, his eyes were still so indifferent, as if he did not care about the horrible burns on his face that were as beautiful as peach blossoms. This person was indeed not an ordinary knowing destiny powerhouse. In terms of strength, he was almost as powerful as Xiaohe, who had been hurt by Tang. In terms of will, he was even more terrifying. Looking at Long Qing, who was like coal in the rain with smoke rising from his body, but his expression was as cold as ice, Ning Ke felt a little bitter. He thought to himself, "Are you really the son of Yama?" Ning Ke vaguely saw the shadow of Yama. He was not sure if he saw it on Long Qing, but he was very sure that the shadow had fallen on the burning temple. It represented death and despair. But Ning Ke was a person who would never despair before he was sure of his own death. He looked at Long Qing and said, "Your story is very tragic and your current image is also tragic. But all of this is meaningless because you are destined to lose to me and then lose to me again and again. Even if you are lucky to survive today, you will still lose to me in the future because this is destined by Haotian. So the more tragic your story is, the more tragic your image is, and the more ridiculous you will be in the legends of the cultivation world in the future. You always like to talk so much when you are not confident or not ready." Long Qing's expression was very calm and so was his voice. He said, "But as you said, tragic and any means are meaningless at this moment. You will die today." The autumn rain continued to wash, and the talisman of Jing Fu gradually faded, and finally disappeared without a trace. The fallen knights waited in silence outside for a long time. When the talisman of Jing Fu disappeared, without any orders, some rode on uninjured horses, and some silently moved forward to attack the black horse carriage. These fallen knights used to be powerhouses in the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Even those former squires had the cultivation of the see-through state after taking the earth-sitting elixir. The 5 cavalry commanders had all reached the upper see-through state, and each of them could fight with Ning Ke for several rounds. As for the most powerful commander, Zimo, he was already at the peak of the see-through state. His real state was similar to Ning Ke's, and he was also a powerhouse who was only one step away from the knowing destiny state. Such a group of powerhouses was enough to sweep away those inconspicuous small countries. In fact, the headquarters of the Taoist Master Taoism in Dragon Tiger Mountain and many altars of the martial arts sect were also massacred by these fallen knights. On the other side of the black horse carriage, in front of the burning Red Lotus Temple, Long Qing once again summoned his natal black peach blossom. One of the petals on it was almost withered, as if it would fall at any time. But what he summoned was not the peach blossom, but the sword in the peach blossom. A pure black invisible Taoist sword slowly emerged from the black peach blossom. Ning Ke suddenly shook his head. He turned around and ignored Prince Long Qing behind him. Instead, he aimed the iron arrow at the fallen knights. The higher a cultivator's state was, the more sensitive he was to danger. Zimo was the most powerful among the fallen knights, so his senses were the sharpest. When he found that Ning Ke was aiming at him, he did not hesitate to fall forward into the grass. He used to be the commander of the cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace and was a professional soldier. He knew that if he wanted to save his own life on the battlefield, then he should not cherish anything like elegance. Ning Ke did not intend to shoot him, because he knew that this fallen commander at the peak of the see-through state was very powerful, and he might not be killed by an arrow. He shot the last iron arrow in his hand at the other fallen commander who was approaching on horseback. There was a loud bang. That upper-level grotto profound realm depraved commander simply did not have any chance to dodge. The upper half of his body was blasted into pieces by this iron arrow. After a moment, flesh mixed with blood sprinkled onto the ground from the sky like rain. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The pieces of the corpses fell into the rain-soaked grass, splashing blood. Some of them fell beside the fallen knights and even brushed past their faces. Although they knew that those warm pieces of flesh were their companions who had gone through life and death together, the fallen knights did not show any emotion on their faces. They just silently and attentively looked at the black horse carriage. Seeing this, Ning Ke once again confirmed that these masters in black Taoist robes were cultivators who really knew how to kill. They were worthy of respect and even awe. On the battlefield, the best way to show respect to one's opponent was to kill him. When Ning Ke rarely decided to respect someone, it often meant that the most thorough and bloody battle was about to begin. Just like every battle in the past years. Sang Sang habitually held the big black umbrella and was ready to stand beside Ning Quebec. However, she suddenly felt that the cold aura in her body had become a little strange. She coughed twice sadly. Ning Ke pushed her back to the soft couch in the carriage and jumped onto the carriage. He closed the skylight with his foot and looked at the fallen knights not far away. He gently waved his knife. His first knife chopped at the shaft of the carriage and cut the reins tied to the big black horse. Although the big black horse had the ability to break the reins on its own, Ning Ke knew that this silly thing seemed to be shameless, but it was actually very loyal. If he did not cut the reins, then it might really foolishly stay and die with him and Sang Sang. Ning Ke cut the reins and set the big black horse free. This also meant that he did not have much hope of leaving alive today. A flying sword pierced through the air with a shrill sound. Ning Ke turned his wrist and chopped at the air with his padao. It seemed to be a casual cut, but it was unimaginably precise. The thick and solid blade directly shook the flying sword away. It was like a scavenger who saw something useless in a garbage dump and casually picked it up with a stick and threw it into the sewer. I can't hold on any longer. I have to hold on a little longer. I don't know when the next chapter will come out. I don't know if I have time to send out the leaflet for canvassing for votes. Anyway, I want it first. Everyone has a monthly ticket. Vote for me quickly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 532. The buzzing sound of high-speed vibrations could be heard around the black horse carriage. Every buzzing sound represented a sharp flying sword. When Ning Ke slashed away a flying sword, the fallen knights confirmed that Mr. 13 of the Academy was extremely sensitive to the changes in the aura of heaven and earth. No matter how they tried to hide the traces of their flying swords, they could not escape his eyes. Therefore they changed their tactics and stopped trying to hide the traces of their flying swords. Instead, they tried their best to exert their psyche power to maximize the power of each flying sword. However, to Ning Ke this kind of fighting method was meaningless. After cultivating the Great Spirit, his physical strength and power were incomparable to that of ordinary cultivators. He wandered around the black horse carriage. Occasionally, he struck with his blade, and a blade radiance would appear in the autumn rain around him, and a flying sword would be knocked away. No one and no sword could get within a foot of him. This was the powerful tactic of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, that his master, Master Yensei, had mentioned to him. Ning Ke not only understood the principle of a foot of space in front of him, but he also understood the great river sword style of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, through Yi Hongyu's thin piece of paper. Now, his bladesmanship was not only sharp and simple, but also had a majestic and irresistible power, as well as an extremely strange sword style. No one could get close to him, but he could. The liquid condensed from the Great Spirit in his body was spinning at a high speed, continuously releasing Great Spirit. He stepped on the muddy grass with his right foot and splashed a large amount of muddy water. He then instantly appeared in front of a fallen knight, leaving an afterimage in the air. With a puff, the blade in his hand pierced deep into the thigh of the fallen knight. Then he pulled it out as fast as lightning. The Great Spirit turned again, and he flew back more than 100 feet, returning to the side of the black horse carriage. At this moment, a fallen commander glanced at Ning Quebec. Ning K's face was slightly pale. He felt that his sense of perception was in turmoil, as if a huge wave was about to be set off. Only then did he realize that this fallen commander was a rare psyche master. Not many people in the world had a stronger psyche power than Ning Quebec. Especially after he received the fragments of consciousness from Master Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he had become the natural nemesis of psyche masters. Even Master Dao Shi of the Shenkong Temple could not defeat him in the spiritual world, let alone this person. Ning Ke glanced at the fallen commander. The vigorous psyche power in his sea of consciousness directly erased the psyche power that this person had sent at him. That fallen commander's face suddenly turned pale. He held his stomach and vomited. The food in his stomach mixed with blood spurted out from his mouth and nose. He looked extremely miserable. In the battle, Ning Ke's strange and indescribable body movements had already shocked everyone present. It was widely acknowledged in the cultivation world that a psyche master would have an absolute advantage in a battle of the same state. However, Ning Ke had only glanced at the fallen commander and caused him to suffer a serious backfire. It was even more shocking and unimaginable. Ning Ke indeed only had peak grotto profound cultivation realm. But he had too many unique skills, including the youngest uncle's great spirit, Lu Bai's sword style, the body of the powerhouse of the Devil's Doctrine, Lotus's consciousness, and Master Yen Sei's talisman Taoism skills. Now he had even surpassed the invincible realm below the knowing destiny state, and already had the strength close to the knowing destiny state. In other words, even if facing an ordinary grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, Ning Ke would not have any fear. He even had 40% confidence that he could kill the opponent with his sword. However, these fallen knights did have considerable strength, especially when they cooperated with each other during the battle. Whether it was their body movements, footsteps, or even breathing, they seemed to follow the same frequency. Fighting with these fallen knights was like fighting with one person. Every time Ning Ke seemed to kill someone with his superhuman body movements, there would always be a flying sword coming from a dangerous angle. Some people even directly used their arms to block. In order to protect their companions, these fallen knights who had been condemned as sinners by the West Hill Divine Palace did not hesitate to die, as if they were extremely noble. It was precisely because of this that Ning Ke had injured several people in a few short moments since the beginning of the battle. However, except for the fallen commander who had been seriously injured by the backfire of his psyche power, he had not been able to make any of the enemies lose their combat power. Even so, Ning Ke believed that he could kill all of these people, or in other words, exhaust them, including that powerful person at the peak of the see-through state, as long as he had enough time. However, he was even more clear that he was actually fighting with that person, and that person had not yet made a move. Long Qing made a move. A black peach blossom grew in his hand. A pure black invisible Taoist sword grew out of the black peach blossom. The black Taoist sword floated in front of the Red Lotus Temple like a ghost. A sense of quietus gradually spread from the sword. Sensing this sense of quietus, the fallen knights were refreshed, as if they had been injected with fresh energy. The flying swords interweaved like flowing lights, and immediately blocked Ning Ke in a very small area in front of the black horse carriage. Ning Ke also felt this sense of quietus. Somehow, there was a shivering cold feeling in the depths of his heart. He always felt that something terrible was about to happen, and his body also became tired. In fact, Long Qing had already made his move a long time ago. When Ning Ke shot the seventh iron arrow, he waved his Taoist robe and turned the autumn rain into a stone waterfall, blasting at the black horse carriage. Some of the faintly black raindrops avoided the big black umbrella and fell into the carriage. They fell on Song Song's body. At this time, Song Song's pale and haggard cheeks became strangely red, as if she was extremely hot. She coughed more and more violently, and there seemed to be spots of blood on her clothes. Sang Sang knew that she was poisoned. Although she did not know how she was poisoned. She knew that if she forcibly used the divine skill at this time, no one knew what would happen. However, feeling the horrible aura of quietus penetrating through the carriage, and watching Ning Ke struggling under the siege of the crazy fallen knights through the window, she knew that she had no choice. Sang Sang held the wall of the carriage and stood up with difficulty. She opened the skylight and then held the big black umbrella with both hands, opening it to the autumn rain that kept falling from the sky. She opened up a piece of light. The holy Haotian's divine light lit up the gloomy sky in the rain, and the grass in front of the Red Lotus Temple was clearly illuminated, as if the rain had stopped at this moment, and the scorching sun had come back to the world. Sang Sang was on the roof of the carriage, holding the big black umbrella with both hands. Countless milky lights jumped out of her body, and then sprinkled everywhere in the green mountains through the big black umbrella. Because of the closeness hidden in the deepest part of their hearts, the fallen knights woke up from the aura of quietus. Looking at the familiar and awe-inspiring divine light, some of them remembered the identity of the girl in the handmaiden costume, and could not help but show fear in their eyes. They had served Hao Yin in the Westhill Divine Palace for decades, and their reverence for Hao Yin had long been deeply rooted in their bones. Facing the future great divine priest of light of the Divine Hall, and facing the purest and most solemn Hao Yin's divine light, how could they not be afraid? Since the beginning of the fall, they were willing to offer their souls to Yama in search of survival and power, but it did not give them much resistance to Hao Yin's divine light. Instead, it made them even more afraid. The faces of the fallen knights were extremely bright, and all of them had very complicated expressions. Some were confused, some were regretful, and some were afraid. Some even covered their faces and cried in despair. Long Qing's situation was relatively better. He had a deeper faith in Hao Yin, but it was easier for him to temporarily erase it on the spiritual level. However, the black sword he pulled out from his natal peach blossom had become the primary attack target of Hao Yin's divine light because of its innate aura of the netherworld. The pure black invisible Taoist sword let out a painful moan, accompanied by a light sizzling sound. Bursts of green smoke rose from the sword, as if it would melt in the next moment in the bright world. Long Qing groaned in pain and his burnt face turned pale. His burnt body began to emit green smoke, and the wounds caused by the iron arrows began to bleed again. He took back the black sword, ignoring the blood flowing on his body, and walked toward the black horse carriage. Because he found that if he wanted to kill Ning Ke, he had to first kill the little handmaiden. Fortunately for Long Qing and the fallen knights, the Hao Yin's divine light in front of the ruined temple today was not as abundant and lasting as the Hao Yin's divine light by the Yanming Lake that night. It seemed to be a long time, but it was just a moment. The Hao Yin's divine light on Sang Sang was extinguished, and the cold autumn rain ruled the world again. She looked at the faint shadow on the grass under the carriage and lowered her head. She was seriously ill and poisoned, so there was no way for her to transfer the Hao Yin's divine light into Ning Ke's body today. She had done everything she could. She turned pale, fainted, and fell into the horse carriage. The big black umbrella left her hand and floated to the puddle beside the carriage, swaying gently. The holy Hao Yin's divine light, even if it only illuminated the world for a moment, was still bright. In that moment of absolute light, Ning Ke turned into a very faint shadow, gliding on the grass at a high speed. His blade silently swept past those fallen knights who were as dumb as wooden statues. Then he squeezed out the last of his psyche power and activated all the Fu papers in his arms, turning them into countless walls of fire and wind and snow, blocking Long Qing outside the black horse carriage. Sang Sang had been with the big black umbrella since she was a child, and she was reluctant to let it go even when she was sleeping. At this time, the big black umbrella left her hand, which could only mean that Sang Sang's situation was very critical. The autumn rain fell again and the fallen knights fell to the ground one after another. There was a horrible wound on their necks, chests, and abdomens. In the moment when the light came and left, 2 fallen commanders and 5 fallen knights were killed by Ning Quebec. The others who were still alive were also seriously injured and could not stand up for a while. The situation in the field suddenly changed. Now the only ones who could still stand were Ning Ke and Long Qing. After a series of bloody battles, Ning Ke's psyche power was exhausted, the Great Spirit was exhausted, the talismans were used up, and the arrow box was empty. He was really at the end of his rope. He moved with difficulty to the side of the black horse carriage, leaned against the wall, and silently lowered his head, breathing tiredly and heavily. Every breath seemed to be so painful. Zmo sat on the grass and his body was covered with blood. He looked at Ning Ke who was leaning against the carriage, and his eyes could not help showing an expression of awe. He could not understand how this person who was only at the peak of the see-through state, could compete with the priest and so many other masters. How did he do it? Give up. Zmo looked at him and said in a trembling voice, "Let your strong soul follow His Excellency and open a new page for this world. In this way your name, Mr. 13, can also be spread for thousands of years." Ning Ke leaned against the carriage tiredly and did not answer him. Long Qing looked up at the sky, and the cold autumn rain entered his eyes, slightly wet. His hands trembled slightly, and he knew that he had finally won the most important victory in his life. Now you can finally admit defeat. Long Qing withdrew his gaze and looked at Ning Ke calmly. Ning Ke still held the hilt of the padao and stared at the rainwater splashing in the puddle in front of his feet. He said tiredly, "The headmaster said that this is my story and only I can write it. Since it is a story written by me, you can't be the hero in the story, so I don't understand why I lost." Long Qing said, "The world is very big and everyone has their own story. You have one and so do I. But unfortunately today's story is mine, and I am the hero." Ning Ke was silent. He knew that Long Qing was right. He had exhausted all means but still could not change the situation. The most important thing was that Sang Sang was now unconscious. Long Qing asked, "Do you have any last words?" Ning Ke looked up at the cold autumn rain and suddenly shouted, "Headmaster! Eldest brother! Sang Sang and I are going to die. Come and save me." Long Qing's expression was very interesting. He suddenly felt that Ning Ke was a very interesting person. No one responded to Ning Ke's shout, and the mountain was lonely. As the headmaster had repeated countless times, there might be people who were born with knowledge, but there was no omniscient person in this world. "I'm just trying. You don't mind, do you?" Ning Ke looked at Long Qing and said with a difficult smile. Long Qing said, "I don't mind." Ning Ke threw away the padao in his hand, looked at him, and suddenly said very seriously, "I have last words." Long Qing said, "Go ahead." Ning Ke looked at his eyes and said, "Let my little handmaiden live." Long Qing was silent for a moment, and then said calmly, "I'm sorry I can't do it." "What?" "Because she will avenge you. You are afraid of her." No one dares to look down on a future great divine priest of light. Long Qing looked at him and said with a smile, "And a future great divine priest of light must taste good. It will bring me unimaginable benefits and may even not be inferior to you." Ning Ke squinted slightly and said after a while, "I don't understand what you are saying." Long Qing explained very patiently, "I learned a cultivation method from the tomes of Arcane, which can swallow a cultivator's psyche power, divine power, experience, consciousness, and all the cultivation for my own use. It is said that this cultivation method originated from the Devil's Doctrine's notorious practice of Tao Tai, but it is not so bloody, and does not need to eat people like a beast." The reason why he explained so clearly was that he wanted to see emotions such as despair, anger, resentment, unwillingness, and madness on Ning Ke's face, because Ning Ke had once brought these emotions to him. So he always thought that if he could return all these to Ning Ke, it would be a very good thing. "I'm in a good state now. I've entered the legendary state, but I've been in a manic state several times. This is 4,000 words and the next chapter should not be too late. I don't care so much, I'll go crazy first. There will definitely not be any updates tomorrow. I'll say this in advance, let me lie down and die." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 533. After hearing these words, Ning Ke's face showed no expression. Long Qing could not help but feel a little disappointed. But at this moment, unexpectedly, Ning Ke suddenly bounced off the wall of the carriage. He pulled out a sharp sword from nowhere with his right hand and stabbed Long Qing's lower abdomen like a poisonous snake. This sword had been hidden in the black carriage. He used this period of breathing to accumulate the last bit of strength to fight for this opportunity. This opportunity could not be missed. So he used Lu Bai's sword style. He stabbed Long Qing's lower abdomen, or more precisely he stabbed Long Qing's spleen. Because he knew there was a hole in Long Qing's chest. The corpse of a fallen knight swept across and smashed onto Ning Ke's sword. Then it fell onto Ning Ke's body. Then, the heavy maple trunk and the wind and rain all turned into violent attacks that came one after another. Ning Ke was already exhausted and could even be said to be a lamp without oil. How could he withstand such violent attacks? His sword momentum suddenly collapsed, his bones were broken, and he was seriously injured and fell to the ground. "I know very well what kind of person you are. You are like a cockroach. It is not easy to kill you. Even if you are going to die, you will be ready to bite someone in the end." Long Qing walked in front of him and looked down at him quietly. He said, "But I deliberately left this opportunity for you, because I want you to have a taste of hope, only to find that it is just a bubble. Hope, disappointment, despair, and then hope, disappointment, and despair again. These years, thanks to you, I have spent in this endless cycle of pain. Today I give it back to you." Ning Ke was covered with blood and sat by the carriage. "I have been observing your performance in the battle just now. Your strength is amazing, your speed is amazing, and the strength of your body is also amazing. Then there is only one possibility. You have already joined the devil. Long Qing's eyes were jumping with excitement. He said, Ning Ke, you really did not let me down. You have obtained too many things in your life, including the academy, the devil's doctrine, and even Lu Bai's aura of talisman Taoism. Although I have sucked Master Zhang's aura, it is not as delicious as Uncle Yen says. Ning Ke looked at him and said tiredly, is it really so fun to be a lunatic? Long Qing didn't listen to what he was saying at all. His eyes were bright, and he said excitedly in a trembling voice, if I devour you and your little handmaiden full of divine light, how powerful will I be? Is it possible for me to directly enter the peak of knowing destiny, or even cross the boundary between heaven and man? Although you don't look very beautiful right now, you shouldn't think too much about it. Ning Ke did not even have the strength to lift a finger, but he did not forget to mock him. Hearing this, Long Qing naturally thought of the banquet in Chang'an City. He remembered that it was the first time he was humiliated by this person. His cold Taoist heart was somewhat broken. He took a deep breath to calm down and said, when you were lucky enough to learn so many unique skills, did you ever think that you would eventually dedicate them to me? After saying this, his bright eyes gradually dimmed. The black and white lines gradually disappeared, turning into a thick gray gloomy like rain clouds. Looking at the strange changes in Long Qing's eyes, Ning Ke knew that the final moment was coming. He thought that he had been cultivating hard all his life, but this lunatic died. He couldn't help but feel unwilling. He and Sang Sang had rolled in bed for a lifetime, but they had never really been intimate. He couldn't help but feel unwilling. He thought of the bitterness in his previous life and also in this life. He finally got rich, but he couldn't enjoy it. He couldn't help but feel unwilling. In short, no one could really be willing in the face of death. Especially in this horrible way of death. Ning Ke looked at Long Qing's gray eyes and felt the aura of nirvanic greed. It entered his sense of perception from Long Qing's eyes and said, even if I become a ghost, I will *CK the flower addict. After saying this, he tiredly leaned against the wheel, no longer caring about what would happen next. At this time, Sang Sang was in the carriage. She was only half a step away from him. He hoped that if there was a next life, he could only be half a step away from her from the moment he was born. Nirvanic was the meaning and greed was the essence. After the aura from Grey Eye entered Ning Ke's sense of perception, it found that the originally stored strong psyche power had been exhausted, and it couldn't help but feel sorry. Then, the aura dived into the depths of Ning Ke's sense of perception from the inside out, trying to plunder the remaining psyche power in the deepest part of his spiritual world, as well as the more precious fighting experience, fragments of consciousness, and the wisdom inherited from predecessors. All of these were the essence of the state of cultivation. After Long Qing learned the Grey Eye skill from the shot hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, he had tried it many times. Whether it was Master Zhang of Dragon Tiger Mountain or those masters of the martial arts sect, they all became withered corpses under his Grey Eye skill. He was already very familiar with how to suck the opponent's state of cultivation. However, today's situation was a bit strange. When the aura of nirvanic greed sank into the deepest part of Ning Ke's sense of perception, it didn't know what it touched, but it actually gave birth to the emotion of fear like a living creature. It screamed silently and wanted to escape, because it faintly sensed that there were some things there that it couldn't touch. However, it was too late. In the deepest part of Ning Ke's black spiritual sea, several fragments sensed the aura of the Grey Eye skill. They seemed to be stimulated and began to shine with a dim light. Then the light emitted by these fragments became brighter and brighter, and more fragments began to shine in the depths of the sea. They looked like beautiful pearls. At the bottom of the sea there was a sea of pearls. Every pearl was a fragment of consciousness. Some fragments of consciousness came from the sword marks on the stone walls of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. They belonged to the youngest uncle of the academy. They were fearless, powerful, and extremely proud. How could they be tempted by evil things? What scared the aura of nirvanic extinction most was the most numerous fragments of consciousness in Ning Ke's spirit sea. Although it could suck everything greedily, the consciousness on those fragments seemed to be greedier and hungrier than it. These fragments of consciousness came from Master Lotus. They were the wisdom and everything that Master Lotus left in this world. And among them was Tao Tai. The real practice of Tao Tai. The Grey Eye skill originated from Tao Tai. After being modified by the predecessors of Taoism, it was not as bloody as before. However, it was far less powerful than Tao Tai. In other words, the practice of Tao Tai was the real ancestor of the Grey Eye. When the Grey Eye met Tao Tai, it was like a shark meeting a killer whale. They were both extremely greedy and bloodthirsty existences. They could never coexist. Taotai was a very strange existence. Only by catching its own kind as food could it really wake up. Therefore it was even more powerful, greedy and bloodthirsty. At the bottom of Ning Kei's black spiritual sea, countless fragments of consciousness lit up one by one, as if they were secretly in accordance with some mysterious rhythm. It was also like some kind of breathing. Between inhaling and exhaling, it produced an extremely terrifying sucking power. The aura of nirvanic extinction from Long Qing could only let out a silent cry before it was captured by the fragments of consciousness left by Master Lotus and then directly swallowed. The aura that had been sleeping in those fragments of consciousness for several years was thus awakened. The autumn rain continued. The fire in the Red Lotus Temple had long been extinguished, and the whole world was dark. Around the black horse carriage there was dead silence. The fallen knights who were still alive sat up with difficulty, but could not walk for a while. They looked over there with mixed feelings. At this moment, Ning Kei suddenly opened his eyes. But this pair of eyes did not look like his eyes at all. The expression in this pair of eyes was very calm, but also very complicated. It seemed to be as merciful as the Buddha, but also as cold as the devil. It was extremely vicissitudes, and no one knew how much wisdom and life experience it contained. This pair of eyes quietly looked at Long Qing, revealing a slightly mocking expression. Long Qing had already felt strange. Not only did he not suck down Ning Kei's cultivation state, but his gray eye seemed to have been seriously damaged. When he saw Ning Kei's vicissitudes of life, he was even more frightened and speechless. That was the fear of the unknown. It was the fear of things getting out of control. The mockery in Ning Kei's eyes grew stronger and stronger. Long Qing's body became colder and colder. Ning Kei suddenly reached out his hands and held Long Qing's shoulders tightly. Then he lowered his head and bit Long Qing's neck. Long Qing let out a shrill scream. On the grass beside the horse carriage, the fallen knights were terrified and did not know what had happened. Ning Kei did not feel anything. He just lowered his head and bit Long Qing's neck fiercely. He used his teeth to cut Long Qing's skin and muscles with difficulty. The moment he tasted the sweet blood, he began to suck desperately. His cheeks kept bulging and falling, sucking greedily. Ning Kei was in a trance at this time and did not know what he was doing. He just felt extremely thirsty and wanted to drink water. When he came into contact with the liquid, he kept sucking it. Vaguely, he suddenly felt that he was not drinking water at this time, because there were many complex tastes in this warm liquid. Some taste good and some taste bad. Logically, he should not know where the taste came from, but this information automatically appeared in his sense of perception. There was the smell of the Elder of Martial Arts, the smell of Celestial Master Zhang of Dragon Tiger Mountain, and an extremely domineering smell, which seemed to come from a Taoist surnamed He. As for the freshest and most comfortable smell, it was recorded in the depths of his sense of perception, so he knew that it was the smell of the heavenly power pill. Ning Kei gradually woke up. The fragments of consciousness left by Master Lotus in his sense of perception began to show the details of the practice of Taotai. Ning Kei instinctively resisted the aura revealed in this skill, but his survival instinct and the desire to drink water when he was hungry and thirsty made him naturally learn it. An extremely cold, powerful and greedy aura gradually shrouded his body. At the same time, it also shrouded Long Qing's body. Zmo forced his body up and wanted to walk to the side of the black horse carriage. However, feeling the cold aura coming from there, he was so afraid that he could not move. Under the tree on the cliff, he used to think that the priest he saw was the legendary Taotai. Tonight, in front of the broken temple, looking at Ning Kei who was emitting a cold and powerful aura, he then understood that the monsters that walked in the dark underworld should look like this. Ning Kei was completely awake, and his eyes had also returned to normal. He slowly moved away from Long Qing's bloody neck and looked at Long Qing, who was pale and extremely frightened. He smiled with some difficulty. His smile looked a little lonely, but at this time, the corner of his mouth was still dripping with Long Qing's blood. Therefore, in Long Qing's eyes, this smile was even more terrifying than the devil. Eating people, such a simple thing is actually not difficult to learn. Ning Kei held Long Qing's shoulders tightly. He thought of the despair at the moment before he died and thought of this person saying that he wanted to eat Sang Sang. The loneliness in his smile turned into calmness, and he said lightly, "When you were lucky enough to learn so many unique skills, did you ever think that you would eventually give them to me?" This was what Long Qing said before he was about to devour his cultivation state. At this time Ning Kei returned the words to him. The twists of fate always came so abruptly that it exceeded everyone's imagination. Who could know what their true fate was? Long Qing used to think that he knew, but now he found that he knew nothing. His eyes were full of fear. He felt that Ning Kei's aura was faintly restraining him. For the first time he felt that Ning Kei was so terrifying. That fear even overcame his reason, and made him desperately want to escape. Long Qing screamed painfully, and forced out the already damaged peach blossom. Then, without hesitation, he used the majestic psyche power of the half-man Taoist in his body to directly explode the peach blossom. The black peach blossom was crushed into the finest powder. The terrible shock wave directly shook Ning Kei and Long Qing away. Ning Kei's body directly broke the carriage wheel. And Long Qing was even more miserable, lying on the ground with blood all over his body. The autumn rain was still falling. The black peach blossom turned into black rain. The blood turned into a blood mist. It spread around the ruins of the ruined temple. Long Qing looked at Ning Kei with hatred and unwillingness, and roared with a trembling voice, "Kill him!" After saying this he fainted. The fallen knight was extremely loyal to Long Qing. Even if he was severely injured when he heard this, he crawled to the black carriage even if he had to use his hands. At this time Ning Kei was digesting a large amount of aura that he had just swallowed and could not move. Whether it was part of the cultivation of the half-man Taoist or the efficacy of the heavenly power pill, they all needed time. He leaned against the broken carriage wheel and closed his eyes. It seemed that the fallen knights really had a chance. However, at this moment, a violent neigh suddenly sounded outside the quiet Red Lotus temple. The big black horse was like a black lightning, passing through the autumn rain. It raised its front hooves and directly crushed the chest of the fallen knight who was closest to Ning Kei. Zemo's face was pale. He never thought that even a beast from the academy could be so terrifying. He groaned in pain and his chest suddenly sank. He used the secret method of the Westhill Divine Palace to start burning his life, and used the fastest speed to regain abundant strength. He roared and punched the big black horse's head. His fist was like the wind. The big black horse neighed wildly and collided with it without fear. There was a heavy muffled sound. The big black horse's front hooves were slightly bent, and it panted in pain. It was not an old yellow bull, and after all, it was no match for a powerhouse at the peak of see-through who was burning his life. At this moment, Zemo noticed that Ning Kei's eyelids were slightly trembling, and he could not help but feel cold. He guessed that Ning Kei might be waking up, so he roared, "Put away the horse and retreat with his excellency." Ning Kei opened his eyes, and saw several black cavalrymen going down the mountain in the autumn rain. The most powerful fallen commander was right in front of him. Ning Kei stood up and asked, "You want to stop me?" Zemo said, "Even though I can only live for 3 more months, I can still stop you now." Ning Kei said, "You are no match for me." Zemo said, "I want to try." Ning Kei looked at the smoke in the rain, and there was no emotion on his face. He casually waved his hand to hit back, and broke a hole in the black horse carriage. Then he reached out and took out the iron bow. Zemo frowned slightly and said, "You have no more arrows?" Ning Kei looked at the unconscious Sang Sang through the hole, and then looked at the injured big black horse. He directly pulled the iron bow. There was no arrow on the string and it was an empty bullet. The bowstring clanked and the sound seemed to split the clouds. There was a very deep bloodline on Zemo's chest. He looked down at his chest in bewilderment. Ning Kei pulled the bow again and the string sounded again. Every time the string moved, the impatience in his heart seemed to fade a little. So he continuously pulled the bow dozens of times. More than 100 feet away, there were dozens of bloodlines on Zemo's body. It collapsed like a sand mountain and blood and flesh splashed everywhere. Ning Kei put the iron bow behind his back. He stood in the cold autumn rain, deep in thought. From this moment on, he entered the knowing destiny state and could be said to be a real Taoist. But it was different from the previous 2 breakthroughs. This time he did not feel happy but only tired. "I am also very tired. Please vote for me. Thank you." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 534. Long story short, because very tired. Stormy Night had never been a hot-blooded book because I had purposely avoided such an atmosphere. I wanted to keep a distance from the spy. Of course, the second half of Stormy Night would definitely be hot-blooded, or even melodramatic. I've never been a hot-blooded person, including canvassing for votes. Everyone said that I was good at writing canvassing for votes, but in the end it was just idle chatter. I wanted to write hot-blooded canvassing for votes, but I wasn't good at that kind of style. But today I was hot-blooded. Not only because of the last day of the double monthly votes, but also because of something else. Ever since I declared that I was going to fight for first place in the monthly votes, I knew that I would die in the next few months. Of course, I can't trouble all of you with this kind of thing. The more authors write, the more there will be. Naturally, it will be easier for you to vote. I understand this and I have to write more. However, it just so happens that I have double the monthly votes but I don't do anything. Therefore, I always feel that I am not kind enough to the readers, because this will make it very difficult for the loyal readers to close the gap between me and the ones in front of me. It's not that I don't want to erupt, but I really can't. In fact, logically speaking, it's not that I can't erupt today. Isn't this just overdrawing my life, just like ZMO, who was shattered into more than 3,800 pieces by Ninkei? But I still did it. It's not that I hope to shorten the distance between me and the people in front of me, but I want to let everyone rest assured that I still have the spirit to fight, and that I really value all of you. Do you want me to cut out my heart for you to see? But I am not Long Qin. He had written 34,000 words in 24 hours. I just wanted to make my stance clear to everyone. At the same time, he expressed his gratitude to everyone. There are still 4 hours left for the double time. If anyone is willing to vote for the monthly ticket, please vote for me. Thank you. I'm going to rest. Then there would definitely be no updates tomorrow. He couldn't care less about being scolded for fishing every 3 days. I'll die if I keep writing. My abilities are inadequate. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. I want a monthly ticket. Please cast your monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 535. The sky was as dark as night, and the wind and rain were sorrowful. In the wind and rain, the black horse carriage kept dripping water. Ninkei was deep in thought, and then he woke up in an instant. He walked into the carriage and picked up Sang Sang, who was in a coma. He pinched her slender wrist and felt her pulse. Then he slowly laid her down on the quilt. Looking at her frowning brows and pale face, he could not help but frown. After confirming that the skylight was tightly covered, he walked out of the carriage and came to the carriage wall that he had broken with his fist. He pulled the sharp edge of the iron sheet back to its original position. At least he did not have to worry about raindrops falling into the hole and wetting Sang Sang's face. The big black umbrella was in the puddle beside the carriage, trembling in the cold wind. He picked it up and walked to the black horse that was kneeling in the rain. He knelt down on one knee and covered it with the umbrella. Then he lowered his body and hugged its strong neck. The big black horse's head was hit by Zimo's heavy punch. Its bones were not broken, but the strong shock made it feel very uncomfortable. It kept panting in pain. At this time, being hugged by Ninkei and feeling the warmth of its master, it seemed to feel a little better and its breathing gradually calmed down. Ninkei snorted. He held the black horse's neck with one arm and helped it stand up in the dirty rain. Then he stroked it and slowly walked to the fiery lotus temple, where the fire had long been extinguished and only the blackened ruins were left. With the help of the remaining eaves, the black horse was temporarily sheltered from the rain. At least the temperature of the horse would not drop too much. Then he disappeared in the wind and rain. After a while, the autumn rain finally stopped, and the world became clear again before the arrival of dusk. Ning Kei's figure appeared in front of the fiery lotus temple. His right hand tightly held more than 10 black iron arrows. The iron arrows were obviously deformed and were dripping with rain. The primordial 13 arrows were his most powerful, reliable and precious weapon. No matter when or where, he would not allow them to be lost. He had previously gone to the Qingling Hill to look for them. Looking at the obviously deformed iron arrows, he knew that if they were not carefully repaired, these arrows should not be able to be used again. Thinking of how he could not kill Prince Longqing on the spot after shooting all the iron arrows in the box, his eyes revealed a strong vigilance. Although Prince Longqing had been utterly defeated in the end, Ning Kei was clear that this victory had little to do with him. Longqing was destined to be the only one who could survive in the world with him. Longqing was indeed indescribably powerful. If not for the consciousness fragment left by Master Lotus, Ning Kei would have died long ago. He would not even have the chance to be vigilant. Ning Kei found a few pieces of meat from the scorched temple and walked to the big black horse. He gently persuaded it to chew a piece and covered it with a blanket. Opening the door, he bent his body and walked in. He threw the heavy iron arrow to a corner of the carriage. Suddenly he felt as if there was something stuck in his teeth. It was very uncomfortable. He frowned and reached out to dig it out. It turned out to be shredded meat. The shredded meat looked very fresh, but it had the tenacity that cooked meat did not have. This is raw meat. This was raw human flesh. This was the flesh from Longqing's neck. Previously, Ning Kei had bitten Longqing's neck and sucked a lot of blood. In a trance, he naturally bit off some meat and stuffed it between his teeth. Looking at the slightly red shredded meat between his fingers, Ning Kei frowned and could not help but have an urge to vomit. After all, this was human flesh and it was the flesh of Longqing whom he hated the most. This urge to vomit was mostly due to human instinct, but a large part of it was due to Ning Kei destroying himself in his consciousness. He did not want to have these things in his stomach. However, at this moment he saw Sang Sang, who was curled up in the quilt like a child. He was silent for a while and used his strong willpower to suppress the urge to vomit, but his face became a little pale. Ning Kei walked to Sang Sang and sat down beside her. He pressed the quilt for her, and then took out a small knife to cut his wrist and put it beside Sang Sang's lips. Whether it was the pain of the knife cutting his wrist and almost cutting his bones, or the terrible feeling of Sang Sang sucking his blood unconsciously in a coma, none of it made his expression change. He just sat there in silence, looking at Sang Sang calmly and even lovingly. Sang Sang was extremely weak and poisoned, so she did not have a strong suction force when she was in a coma. Before long, the wound on Ning Kei's wrist gradually healed. He raised his arm without hesitation, picked up the knife and cut deeply again. Then he put the knife to her lips again. He had sucked Longqing's blood before, and a part of the power of the heavenly power pill in Longqing's flesh and blood had entered his body. He was very clear that the power of the heavenly power pill had just entered his blood from his stomach when he picked up the arrow, but it had not been completely absorbed by him. In other words, only at this moment could his blood save people. After making sure that Sang Sang had sucked enough blood, Ning Kei moved his wrist away and walked out of the carriage to the big black horse under the eaves of the ruined temple. The last few drops of rain fell on his pale face, as if to wash it until it became transparent. He walked to the big black horse and took out the most precious seal wort prepared by 11th brother. Then he rubbed it on his wrist roughly and put it in front of the big black horse's mouth. The seal wort contained a lot of power. Except for the old yellow bull, the big white goose and the big black horse, no one could directly swallow it like this, not even Ning Kei who had joined the devil. At this time, the seal wort was mixed with his blood which had the smell of the heavenly power pill, and the seal wort was even more pungent. The big black horse raised its head tiredly and glanced at Ning Quebec. It sniffed the blood on the seal wort and thought that no one would want to eat such a bloody thing. It was really not in line with the taste of the Academy's idiot. It turned its head away with extreme disgust. Ning Kei subconsciously raised his hand and wanted to beat it up like before. But when he saw its pitiful but proud appearance, his heart softened. Eat it quickly. It's good for your health. He coaxed it softly. The big black horse looked at him confusedly and wondered why he was different today. The big black horse ate the blood-stained seal wort and Sang Sang drank half of the blood in her belly. They were both digesting the power inside. During this period of time, Ning Kei made some simple repairs to the wheels of the horse carriage. Then he looked at the carriage wall that was made of steel and fell silent. He did not know how he could punch through the wall of the carriage. It was extremely difficult even for the powerhouses of the devil's doctrine to do so. In the end, he could only conclude that it was a burst of power when a cultivator first entered the knowing destiny state. The hole in the carriage wall could barely be mended, but the magical talisman array carved by Master Yensei could not be easily repaired because of the broken lines. Sang Sang and the big black horse's injuries gradually stabilized, but they could not recover immediately. They still needed a place to heal. The current situation was that both the carriage and the people needed to be repaired. Under such circumstances, it was naturally impossible to drive directly to the Lank Temple. It was dusk and the sky of Qingling was dim after the rain. However, there was a fresh smell of life. It was the smell of the juice from the broken grass, or the mottled smell of blood in the grass. The hard wheels rolled over the loose soil after the rain. It seemed that a small part of the wheels had sunk into it. Without the power of the talisman array on the carriage wall, this carriage made of steel was unimaginably heavy. At least 8 of the strongest horses were needed to pull this carriage. In the past, when the big black horse was completely healthy, it could do so. But now it was injured and did not have the strength to do so. Ning Ke held the reins with his right hand and pulled the black carriage with his left hand. They went down the meadow. Behind the reins was the tired big black horse. Sang Sang was lying in the black carriage. What I can say is that I was supposed to go to Chengdu tomorrow, but in order to write more I won't go. I won't go to Shijin either. I'll go home on the 12th. When I get home I'll make everyone happy. I hope you won't be as depressed as I am today. I wish you all a happy life. You can hold the horse and pull the carriage. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 536. The Kingdom of Qi was located in the southwest and was an inconspicuous country among the countries in the Central Plains. Naturally, its capital city could not be compared to Chang'an. It was not magnificent, but it was exceptionally clean and quiet. Under the yellowish ginkgo leaves, pedestrians weaved in and out. They looked calm or numb, as if the beautiful scenery on the street and the daily life stories around them could not affect them at all. For thousands of years, the Kingdom of Qi had been a vassal of the divine halls of West Hill. Haoyan Taoism enjoyed a high status here. Carriages bearing the emblem of the divine halls would occasionally pass through the streets, and the people would kneel by the roadside devoutly. There was a white Taoist temple in the north of the capital. The exterior of the building was inlaid with various gems, and the edges of the rain path were painted with gold powder. It was obviously modeled after the divine halls of West Hill on Peach Mountain, but much smaller. The height of this Taoist temple was even higher than the imperial palace of the Kingdom of Qi in the center of the capital. Standing on top of the Taoist temple and looking at the imperial palace from afar, one would naturally feel as if they were looking down from above. This difference in height was a deliberate arrangement, and it was also the true portrayal of the situation for thousands of years. The succession of the Qi kingdom's throne had to be approved by the Divine Hall. Regardless of military or diplomatic affairs, the Divine Hall's influence could not be shaken off. Therefore one could imagine how powerful the Divine Hall was here. The red-robed priest who lived in the Taoist Hall had a status even vaguely higher than the emperor in Qi Kingdom. With power came endless wealth and resources. All the citizens of the Kingdom of Qi knew that the most dazzling jewels and the rarest items in the Taoist temple were not in the imperial palace, but in the Taoist temple. Wealth was always tempting. Even the most daring and powerful robbers would not dare to steal from the Taoist temple. No robber would be stupid enough to rob here because this Taoist temple was the most heavily guarded place in the Kingdom of Qi. No one dared to easily offend it in Haoyan's world. Just a few days ago, something major happened in the Kingdom of Qi. The Celestial Master Taoism of Longhu Mountain was massacred, and the National Master, Celestial Master Zhang, died horribly. The Divine Halls and the royal family of the Kingdom of Qi jointly sent a large number of people to investigate. However, the atmosphere in the capital was still as gloomy as autumn. The security in the Taoist temple grew tighter. The knights standing on both sides of the stone steps stared coldly at the passers-by. Their eyes were as cold as ice, as if everyone was a thief in their eyes. On the quiet street, an ear-piercing and unpleasant sound of friction suddenly rang out. The knights immediately became alert and looked in that direction. Their indifferent eyes were suddenly filled with disbelief. A black carriage was slowly moving along the street. The black wheels of the carriage rolled over the hard stone road, leaving behind a deep mark. Broken stone chips flew in all directions. The knights were shocked speechless. They wondered how heavy the black carriage was to create such an effect. Also, what material were the wheels of the carriage made of? How could they not be deformed? What was even more difficult for them to understand was that although there was a tall black horse in front of the black carriage, it was not pulled by the horse. Instead, there was an extremely thick rope tied to the front of the carriage, which was pulled by a young man. How strong did this young man have to be to pull such a heavy carriage? This matter was immediately reported to the Taoist temple. A middle-aged divine priest came out to have a look. When he saw this scene, his face became a little gloomy and a little complicated. A person who could pull this carriage with one hand was certainly not an ordinary person. Although he was vigilant, he did not want to cause any trouble. The black carriage slowly moved up the ramp and stopped in front of the Taoist temple. The big black horse lowered its head and panted heavily. It looked extremely tired. Some of the knights who were good horses looked at its smooth fur and could not help but feel sorry for it. They thought that the young man was really bad for raising such a divine horse into a sick one. "What are you doing here?" The middle-aged divine priest looked at the young man and asked with a slight frown. As a member of the West Hill Divine Palace, he carried out decrees on behalf of Haotian in the world. He was used to living a high and mighty life in the capital of the kingdom of Qi. Naturally, he was arrogant and cold. He thought that his question was very gentle, but he did not know how rude it was to others. The young man was, of course, Ning Quebec. If it had been in the past, he would not have been able to accept the West Hill Divine Palace priests. He hated the most speaking to him in the most detestable tone. However, he had come to this Taoist hall for other matters. Moreover, after the battle at the Red Lotus Temple, his temperament had strangely become much quieter. "My wife is seriously ill. I heard that the Taoist temple can cure her, so," Ning Ke said. Only then did the middle-aged divine priest realize that the young man had come to seek medical advice. He could not help but frown and was about to reprimand him. However, he recalled the scene of the black carriage rolling over the stone path and suppressed his impatience. He waved his hand and said, "It's not time to put the medicine yet. Come back in 3 days." Billions of people in the world were believers of Haotian. The West Hill Divine Palace had to maintain its rule. In addition to its divine power, it naturally had to give its divine grace at the right time. The will of Haotian could not be sensed by ordinary people. There were very few divine priests who cultivated in the divine skill, and they could not really cure believers in the world. However, the Taoist temples of each country stored many medicinal herbs and even many rare elixirs. They would provide them to believers for free every once in a while. Of course, no religion would do business at a loss. The West Hill Divine Palace was no exception. Therefore, the Taoist temples of each country strictly controlled the time interval when they put the medicine. They gave believers hope and held it tightly in their hands. "We don't need the divine priests in the Taoist temple to treat us. We just heard that the Taoist temples of each country stored the most medicinal herbs, so we came to take a look. Of course, we will still pay for the medicine," Ning Ke said, and then took out a banknote and handed it over. The middle-aged divine priest was slightly stunned and thought angrily. The medicinal herbs and elixirs in the Taoist temple were all carefully developed by the predecessors of the West Hill Divine Palace. How could they be compared to ordinary prescriptions in the world? How could this man buy them with money? It was an insult to the divine hall. Suddenly, from the corner of his eyes, he saw the number on the banknote and couldn't help but tremble. He thought that if this was an insult, let alone him, even the esteemed red-clothed priest wouldn't mind being insulted a few more times. The middle-aged divine priest's good mood did not last long. When he opened the door and mercifully allowed Ning Ke to pull the black carriage and the black horse through the side door of the Taoist temple, he received a second piece of paper from Ning Quebec. This thin piece of paper was not a banknote but a list. The list was densely packed with words. There were at least 30 kinds of precious medicinal herbs and elixirs, and a large number of them were the secret treasures of the Taoist temple and were forbidden to be spread to the outside world. The middle-aged divine priest did not know how this young man knew that these medicinal herbs were hidden in the Taoist temple. He could not help but be shocked. Even so, he noticed that the handwriting on the list was beautiful and beautiful. It was a rare handwriting. He took a look at the list and then at the banknote. He said with regret and vigilance, "Although I can feel your sincerity to Haotian, I'm sorry to tell you that many of the medicinal herbs on the list cannot be bought with money. No matter how much sincerity you show, it will be meaningless." Ning Ke looked at the medicine warehouse not far away. At this moment, the sound of Sang Sang coughing came from the black carriage. He could not help but frown slightly, and his eyes began to fill with irritation. After leaving the Green Mountain Red Lotus Temple yesterday evening, he did not continue to the Lank Temple. Although the carriage had been repaired, it would take him at least 10 days to reach the Lank Temple with his walking speed. Sang Sang had been in a coma. The poison and the pain had made her face abnormally pale. Under such circumstances, he could only choose the nearest big city and then find the medicinal herbs he needed. Before leaving Chang'an, the 11th brother of the academy, Wang Qi, had left him more than a dozen prescriptions. However, these prescriptions looked ordinary, but some of the herbs could only be found in the back of the mountain of the academy. They were hard to find in the world, no matter if it was a prescription to suppress the cold aura or a prescription to detoxify. Other than the academy, the Taoist temple had the most rare medicinal herbs. Therefore, Ning Ke decided to go to the nearest capital of the kingdom of Qi. From yesterday evening until now, he had led the big black horse in one hand and dragged the heavy carriage with the other. He did not sleep, rest, drink or eat, and trudged on the muddy road after the rain. He had actually made it to the capital. One could imagine how much effort and price he had paid. The only thing that could comfort him was that Sang Sang finally woke up in the early morning. Although her coughing became worse and showed no signs of getting better, at least he was relieved. At this time, Ning Ke seemed to be fine, but in fact, his physical strength had been exhausted. His mind was a little dazed because of excessive tension and fatigue. He had almost forgotten everything. He forgot that he was going to the Lank Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. He forgot that he had just fought with Prince Long Qing and the Fallen Knight. He forgot that he had entered the Knowing Destiny state. He only remembered that he had to find the medicinal herbs for Sang Sang. However, just when he was about to get the medicinal herbs, something else happened. Ning Ke was still silent, but the emotions in his eyes became colder and colder. In the depths of coldness, there was a terrifying manic emotion. His hand slowly grasped the hilt of his knife. Seeing this, the middle-aged divine priest's face suddenly became extremely ugly. He could accept this young man insulting him with silver notes, but he could not accept the young man threatening him with violence. He was a divine priest serving Haotian. Anyone who threatened him with violence was threatening Haotian. Daring to threaten Haotian was blasphemy. In the Taoist temple, the papal knights who had been silently guarding at the side slowly pulled out their swords from their sheaths. The Taoists with cultivation states began to silently mobilize their psyche power. In their eyes, even if this young man had terrifying power, he would be killed if he dared to pull out his knife from its sheath. Coughing sounds came from the black horse carriage again. It seemed that the person was in extreme pain. Ning Ke's body trembled slightly. He woke up from the frenzied emotions and looked worriedly at the window. A thin arm stretched out from the window and gently wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. A weak and pitiful voice came from the carriage. "I'm so tired. Get in the carriage." Ning Ke could fall asleep with his eyes closed. He was indeed extremely tired, but he could not forget the purpose of his trip. He said, "I want to find some medicines." Sang Sang's weak voice sounded again. She said, "Have you forgotten who I am? If I asked them for some medicines, they would be too embarrassed to refuse. I was supposed to fly to Chengdu today, but I said yesterday that I cancelled it in order to go home earlier to write more words and work harder. But I received a call from 72 in the afternoon, asking when I would arrive and if he could pick me up at the airport for a drink. I said I would not come, I would go home to grab the monthly ticket." He was silent on the phone for a moment and then he laughed wildly. Finally, he said that the monthly ticket was not something you could grab if you wanted to. Then I said that when I got home, I would prove it to everyone. I'm a guy who doesn't grab anything, but once I grab something, it's amazing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 537. Ning Ke sobered up a little when he heard Sang Sang's tired voice. He loosened his grip on the hilt of his padao and reached for his waist. He was a Tang from the academy, so he had no good feelings for these fakes from the West Hill Divine Palace. Moreover, Sang Sang was extremely worried and emotionally unstable. However, there was no need to start a war between the Divine Hall and the academy if he could avoid using force. Just as he was about to take his hand out from his waist, an old voice rang out from the depths of the temple. "Mr. 13, you don't have to take it. This is not the wilderness and I am not Cheng Li Shua." As the aged voice sounded, the expressions of the middle-aged priest and the knights immediately became serious. A moment later, an elderly priest wearing a crimson divine robe slowly walked out. Not all Taoists in the West Hill Divine Palace were qualified to wear crimson robes, especially the red-robed priests who were stationed in various vassal states. They had a status that their peers in the Divine Hall could not reach. This old red-robed priest had been stationed in the Kingdom of Qi for more than 30 years. Even though he did not have a strong background in the West Hill Divine Palace, even the Emperor of the Kingdom of Qi had to show him enough respect. Looking at the black horse carriage and Ning Ke beside it, the red-robed divine priest's cloudy eyes were filled with vigilance. He thought that this person had already left the Tang Empire's diplomatic corps and went straight to the Lang Temple. Why would he appear here today? Hearing the name Mr. 13, the previously vigilant and cold knights finally knew the identity of the young man beside the black horse carriage. They could not help but feel extremely conflicted. The Tang Empire was the most powerful country in the world, and the only world that the West Hill Divine Palace could not control. The Academy and Haotian Taoism had always been enemies. There had been many earth-shattering battles that mortals did not know about, but they had never fallen out with each other. The respected red-robed priest could not be arrogant in front of a disciple of the second floor of the Academy, but he would not show any fear either. Under the protection of the West Hill Divine Palace, vassal states like the Song and Qi kingdoms had never experienced the horrors of the Tang cavalry, so they were not afraid. Therefore, the rest of the people in the temple were relatively calm. Looking at the priest in red, Ning Ke said, "Since you know who I am and you don't want those things to happen in the wilderness, I think we can negotiate. I just need some medicinal herbs from you and I'm willing to pay for them. I just need you to hurry up." The red-robed divine priest took the list from the middle-aged subordinate. He frowned and said, "The Academy is indeed worthy of respect, but the Taoism Hall is a place to worship Haotian." Ning Ke could tell that the man was rejecting him. His anxiety and frenzied emotions rose again. He leaned forward slightly and listened to the man's old eyes. He said, "If it was in the past, I would definitely force you to find Yi Hongyu and then humiliate you in front of her. But now I am very anxious, so I beg you to take a good look at the waist token in my hand." He took out a token from his belt and raised it in front of the priest. The distance was so close that it looked like he had smashed it on the priest's wrinkled face. The priest in red heard Yi Hongyu's name. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't figure it out. He had lived in Haotian Taoism all his life. Except for the first few years, he had never heard anyone call her by her name. After a while, he came to his senses and glared at Ning Quebec. Even if Ning Ke was a core disciple of the headmaster of Academy, it was unacceptable for him to call the great divine priest of judgment by her name. However, when his furious gaze came into contact with the waist token, it immediately froze. Looking at the ordinary-looking waist token, the priest in red's old eyes were filled with shock. He thought of the rumor he had heard when he returned to the Divine Hall last year. He thought of the little handmaiden beside Ning Quebec. His body began to tremble uncontrollably, and every wrinkle on his face turned pale. He suddenly felt that he was really old. He had forgotten so many important things. Since Mr. 13 of the Academy was in front of him, how could that person not be here? Being old and muddle-headed meant being muddle-headed. If he was as muddle-headed as himself, how could he continue to be the red-robed divine priest? When he returned to the West Hill this year, if Commander Luo still refused to let go, then he would comply. However, so what if he was old and muddle-headed? After 16 years he finally saw this waist token again. The great divine priest that had been empty for 16 years finally shone again. Everything was enough. The old red-robed divine priest thought of many things in a very short time after seeing the waist token. Then he turned to look at the black horse carriage and slowly knelt down. Seeing this scene, there was a burst of exclamation in the quiet Taoist hall. Ning Ke was not surprised. He had many waist tokens in his belt. However, people in the world could only remember some of them and often forget others. However, what happened next still made him feel a little strange. That red-clothed priest knelt in front of the black carriage, both of his palms landing on the slightly rough stone floor. His grizzled hair trembled slightly as he muttered something. There was no longer the slightest trace of shock or alarm in his eyes, only endless sentimental remembrance, as well as incomparably pious excitement and agitation. The people present still did not understand what had happened. They did not know who was sitting in the black horse carriage. Even if the great divine priest of West Hill had come in person, the red-robed divine priest would not have made such a big bow. Only the middle-aged divine priest vaguely guessed the truth of the matter. As the red-robed divine priest's most trusted subordinate, he had seen the red-robed divine priest's ecstatic drunkenness many nights after he returned from the West Hill Divine Palace last year. He had heard something intermittently. Therefore, he knelt down behind the red-robed divine priest without hesitation. The middle-aged divine priest kowtowed heavily to the black horse carriage. Then, with endless fear or awe, he said in a trembling voice, "Welcome, Lady of Light, to the kingdom of the human world." The 4 words, "Lady of Light," floated slowly in the building and disappeared without a trace before hitting the wall. However, it continued to sound like thunder in the ears of the people. Only the dense sounds of cloth rubbing, knees hitting the ground, and heavy kowtows could be heard in the quiet white Taoist hall. Whether people were standing on the stone steps or reading scriptures, after hearing the middle-aged divine priest's trembling words, they all knelt down as fast as they could. They worshipped the black horse carriage in awe and did not dare to say a word. After a long time, Song Song's slightly tired voice sounded from the black horse carriage, "Get up, all of you." No one got up, because the most respected red-robed divine priest was still kneeling in front of the black horse carriage. From the moment he heard the voice, turbid tears began to flow down his old face. His deep wrinkles were immediately wet, like the cracked earth that had been dry for countless years finally welcoming the spring rain. His face was covered with tears and his body trembled. He was so happy that he forgot to stand up. Let me say this because Mo Yen won the award. I was really happy for a long time and then delayed some time. Okay, I was mainly packing my luggage and chatting with my parents, so I didn't write much. Tomorrow I will have to fly for another day. I have to repeat this countless times. The motherland is really King big. I will leave at 8 a.m. in the morning and try to write some on the plane or at the airport when I have a transfer, and then I will only get home after 9 p.m. If I really can't write anymore, then I will change my leave from the Saturday the day after tomorrow to tomorrow and report to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 538. Last spring, the great divine priest of light left his most important things to Sang Sang before he fought with Master Yen Sei under the pine tree at the top of a nameless mountain in the north of Chang'an. Yen Sei left the array pestle of the god-stunning array and asked Sang Sang to give it to Ning Quebec. The great divine priest of light left an ID token for Sang Sang. From that day on, Sang Sang was no longer Ning Kei's little handmaiden or the miss in distress of the Grand Secretary's mansion. She had a very special identity. Because of this identity, the great divine priest of revelation specially came to Chang'an from the West Hill to meet Ning Kei and made a 3-year appointment with him. And because of this identity, everyone in the Taoism temple in the capital of the kingdom of Qi knelt before the black horse carriage. Ning Kei didn't know until today that Sang Sang had the official title of the Lady of Light in the West Hill Divine Palace. Although he didn't like it subconsciously, he could tell that this title was extremely honorable. Looking at the priests and knights kneeling on the ground, looking at the red-robed priest in front of him who was in tears, and feeling the solemn atmosphere, he was a little confused to find that his little handmaiden was already a bigwig. In the evening, 2 figures appeared on the highest floor of the White Taoism Temple in the capital of the Kingdom of Qi. The golden sunlight shrouded the place, and the ginkgo leaves on the street formed a beautiful contrast. Ning Kei quietly looked at the 4 in autumn. Suddenly, he turned around and looked at the old and tired face of the red-robed priest. He said, "Do you know what it means to let a great divine priest of light die in your Taoism temple? Although she isn't now, everyone in Haoyan Taoism knows that she will be in 3 years." Looking at him, the red-robed priest's cloudy eyes revealed a very complicated emotion. He was a little grateful and a little angry. He said, "Mr. 13, I think you should understand one thing. No one cares more about the safety of the Lady of Light than the West Hill Divine Palace. As for me, I will do my best. Otherwise, I would rather die." Ning Kei didn't know what to say when he heard this answer. Even he couldn't find any fault with the old priest's actions in the past half a day. Relying on the supreme power of the West Hill Divine Palace and its vassal states, the red-robed divine priest mobilized the entire Taoism temple and the imperial court of the Kingdom of Qi to kidnap the most famous doctors in the capital and bring them back to the Taoism temple to treat Sang Sang in a short period of time. As for the antidote that Ning Kei had left for 11th brother, he had already prepared 2 of them forcibly from the imperial palace of the Kingdom of Qi. After taking the medicine, most of the toxins in Sang Sang's body had been eliminated. She was obviously getting better. Although she was still unconscious most of the time, at least her life was not in danger. The poison in the divine throne is very peculiar. Mr. 13, although your prescription is extremely brilliant, it obviously can't be completely eradicated. We still need to think of other methods. As for the Yin energy in the divine throne, I can't. When the red-robed divine priest mentioned Sang Sang, he didn't use the official title of Lady of Light for Sang Sang in the West Hill Divine Palace. Instead, he called her the Divine Throne, as if he was certain that Sang Sang would inherit the Divine Throne of Light. Speaking of this, the old priest looked at Ning Ke coldly and said with endless anger, "The Divine Throne's health is so important. How did the Academy take care of her?" Most people in Haotian Taoism thought that Sang Sang stayed in Chang and to receive the Academy's meticulous care and education. However, the truth was that Sang Sang not only had to continue taking care of Ning Ke's food and clothing, but also often had to cook for the lazy people in the Academy. Ning Ke could imagine that if the people in the West Hill Divine Palace knew that the great divine priest, who was incomparably noble in their hearts, was living such a life, they would definitely go crazy with anger. Therefore, in the face of the red-robed divine priest's anger, he very rationally remained silent. However, he couldn't help but feel a little confused when he thought of the man crying in front of the black horse carriage and his subsequent behavior. He looked at the old eyes of the red-robed divine priest and asked, "Which department are you from?" The red-robed divine priest said calmly and proudly, "I am from the Divine Hall of Light." Ning Ke vaguely understood something and suddenly asked, "Do you know my relationship with her?" The red-robed divine priest said with a complicated expression, "The great divine priest and Mr. 13 are master and servant in name, but they are actually partners." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Wrong?" The red-robed divine priest's expression turned slightly serious and he asked, "What's wrong?" Ning Ke said, "We were engaged before we left Chang'an, so we are husband and wife now." "Congratulations." Even though he said so, there was no joy on the red-robed divine priest's face. He looked extremely numb and even disappointment and pain could be seen in his eyes. There were stories of the great divine priest of West Hill marrying someone in the secular world in history, but that was extremely rare, especially for the great divine priest of light, who was regarded as the closest to Haotian. He had served Haotian wholeheartedly for hundreds of years, so how could he get married? And it was with someone outside of the West Hill. The future great divine priest of light of West Hill had been tricked into becoming the wife of a shameless disciple of the Academy many years in advance. For the people of West Hill, especially in the Divine Hall of Light, it was undoubtedly extremely difficult to accept. However, the great divine priest of revelation had agreed to Ning Ke's conditions in Chang'an, so they could not object. Ning Ke could see the old man's disappointment, pain and hatred towards him, so he was naturally not afraid. However, he still felt that it was a little troublesome when he thought about the future. He said, "Sang Sang is my wife and no one can change that. The great divine priest of revelation has agreed to marry me, which means that he has obtained Haotian's permission. In that case, you and your companion should think clearly. In the future, at least half of the Divine Hall of Light of West Hill will be mine, so don't be hostile to me." This was not a threat. He was very clear that no matter whether it was the old and cunning swindlers in the West Hill Divine Palace or the passionate believers in Haotian Taoism, they would not bow down in the face of such a threat. He only said these words to remind the red-robed divine priest of something and tried to close the psychological distance between them. However, he did not expect that after hearing these words, the red-robed divine priest did not sneer or get angry. Instead, he began to seriously think about it, and the disappointment and pain in his eyes gradually calmed down. After a long time, the red-robed divine priest looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, "I agree with you." The red-robed divine priest looked at Ning Quebec. "In the future, there should be a seat for you in the Divine Hall of Light. If the great divine priest is willing, he can even give you half of the Divine Hall of Light. What's the big deal?" So it was Ning Ke's turn to frown and think. After all, no matter what his relationship with Sang Sang was, the West Hill Divine Palace would not allow the Academy to openly extend their hands into Peach Mountain, let alone directly affecting the Divine Hall of Light. Then why would the red-robed divine priest make such an invitation? He could not come to any conclusion. He looked at the red-robed divine priest and asked directly, "Why?" The great divine priest is still the Lady of Light, young and pure. The West Hill Divine Palace is the most complicated and dangerous place in the world. Even if she appears in Peach Mountain 2 years later, as the great divine priest of revelation said, she still might not be able to sit in the Divine Hall of Light. Fortunately or unfortunately, you are her husband. If the Academy is willing to support the great divine priest through you, then I think her path to the throne will be smoother and more peaceful. The red-robed divine priest lowered his head slightly and showed respect to Ning Ke for the first time in the conversation. Ning Ke was silent. He suddenly realized that as Song Song's status grew, the problems or challenges they faced seemed to become more and more troublesome and complicated. However, these problems could only be faced in the future. Sang Sang was still in a coma and was seriously ill. He had to consider her current health, not her future glory. So he did not continue to discuss this problem. He asked, "When will Yi Hongyu arrive?" The old red-robed divine priest had protested many times when Mr. 13 of the Academy insisted on calling the great divine priest of judgment by her name. However, his protests were always in an awkward position. Thinking of the relationship between Ning Ke and the great divine priest of light, he was afraid that Ning Ke had done even more disrespectful things. So he had to give up the dignity of Haotian Taoism in this aspect. If the great divine priest of judgment comes from the West Hill, it will take at least 10 days. After Sang Sang fell asleep again, Ning Ke ate something and washed up. He recovered some energy and was no longer as tired and absent-minded as when he first arrived at the capital. His thoughts were very clear. She can't be in the West Hill now, because she should know how troublesome this matter is. Even if the entire Haotian Taoism could not guess Long Qing's appearance, she must have guessed it. So she is looking for him. From Dragon Tiger Mountain to the martial arts sect, and then to the Red Lotus Temple yesterday, she should be on this route. Then he looked at the weak red-robed divine priest and said, "If so, why can't she do the same from the Red Lotus Temple if I can spend a day and a night to get here?" The red-robed divine priest sighed softly and said, "The problem is, why did the great divine priest come?" Ning Ke said, "Because she has a lot of questions to ask me." After saying this, he walked into the depths of the White Taoist Temple. Sang Sang was sleeping in one of the bedrooms. He believed that Yi Hongyu would come as soon as she received the news that he was in the capital of the Kingdom of Qi. Just as he said to the red-robed divine priest, Yi Hongyu must have a lot of questions to ask him about Long Qing. If Ning Ke was the person in the world who wanted Long Qing dead the most, then Yi Hongyu would undoubtedly be ranked second. Because the man in the black Taoist robe had been challenging her. But Ning Ke did not tell the red-robed divine priest why he wanted Yi Hongyu to come to see him. Other than exchanging information about Prince Long Qing's resurrection, he had another more important reason. The cold qi in Song Song's body was a very tricky problem. Even the pure Haotian divine light in her body could not suppress it. So he wanted to try other methods. The old red-robed divine priest had used the Haotian divine light that he had cultivated for decades on Song Song's treatment. That was why he became so weak and tired. Because of this, the red-robed divine priest had gained Ning Ke's trust. But this was far from enough to cure Song Song's illness. Ning Ke needed other people who cultivated the West Hill divine skills. Yi Hongyu was undoubtedly the best candidate. At this time, Ning Ke did not know that this person had become the West Hill Great Divine Priest of Judgment. In his eyes, Yi Hongyu was the medicine that Sang Sang needed the most. "I'm going home. I've been rushing around. I'd like to announce in advance that from the 16th until the end of the month. Yes, let's have fun together." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 539. In the capital of the Kingdom of Qi, vigorous and chilling music rang out. 600 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace dressed in black and gold gray armor walked solemnly on the straight street. In the middle of the procession was an extremely gorgeous divine chariot. The chariot was surrounded by layers of gauze that fluttered in the autumn wind, but the face of the person sitting inside could not be seen clearly. Even if the truth could be seen clearly, no one dared to. The papal cavalrymen looked solemnly ahead. The people on both sides of the street knelt devoutly. Their cheeks, which were pressed against the soil, were filled with excitement and fanaticism. Some people even fainted from happiness. The divine chariot came to a stop in front of the White Taoist Temple. All the priests and Taoists of the West Hill Divine Palace who were stationed in the Kingdom of Qi knelt silently on both sides of the stone steps. The highest-ranking priest in the Taoist Temple of the Kingdom of Qi, dressed in red, said respectfully to the divine chariot, "Welcome, great divine priest of judgment, to the human world." The solemn music started again, and the autumn wind gradually calmed down. However, the curtains around the sacred sedan moved even though there was no wind. They were slowly lifted, and an extremely beautiful girl slowly walked down from the sedan. She wore a divine crown studded with jewels. The autumn light of dusk refracted repeatedly in those jewels, and then shrouded her beautiful and emotionless face. She faintly released an otherworldly aura of nobility. This was the first time Yi Hongyu had left the West Hill and come to the human world after succeeding as the great divine priest of judgment. She was no longer the young genius who was obsessed with cultivation. She had supreme authority and power. That was why she did not wear a red dress or a green Taoist robe. Instead, she wore a divine robe. The divine robe of the great divine priest of judgment was red. It was not bright red but the deepest and heaviest red. It was so red that it was almost black. It seemed to be stained with the blood of countless sinners, like a block of ink that was about to burn in the twilight. Unlike what ordinary people imagined, the divine robe of judgment was not very heavy. It was not embroidered with gold. It was simply and solemnly cut. It was very light and thin. A red carpet had already been laid in front of the Taoist temple of the kingdom of Qi. There were newly plucked flowering trees by the side of the steps. Yi Hongyu walked indifferently among the flowering trees towards the temple. As she walked, the light divine robe on her body gradually fluttered in the wind. Her graceful figure was faintly discernible. This was a beautiful and alluring scene. However, no one dared to look directly at the divine chariot, much less the body of the great divine priest of judgment. The old priest in red followed beside Yi Hongyu. Just like the priest from the judicial department, he lowered his head desperately, as if he wanted to be blind. The papal cavalryman in black armor dismounted and took over the defense of the Taoist hall in the shortest time possible. Similarly, no one dared to look into the flowering trees. Beautiful things and people should be appreciated. Seductive gracefulness was worthy of fanatical worship. However, once these beauties and seductions were associated with a great divine priest of West Hill, it was dangerous. They did not want to be, so they of divine of Hill of West Hill. And of divine. Of divine of Yang. Of Hill of priest of Chin of mountain, in and of Qi Hill of great of spirits of Yen of Hill, Lin, of. They did not want to sink into such a situation which was worse than death, so they did not dare to look. There was only one person who could look directly at Yi Hongyu's beautiful face and seductive body under the divine robe. His expression was calm, but he did not hide the admiration and desire in his eyes. Yi Hongyu looked at the young man in the black uniform of the academy behind the door of the temple. A smile suddenly appeared on her beautiful face, which her subordinates had never seen. Her smile was very complicated. It was a little mocking, emotional, disdainful, and contemptuous. It was definitely not a sweet smile. But it was just a smile. She seemed to have returned from the infinite light and solemn divine kingdom to the human world, from the high and mighty great divine priest to the house by Yanming Lake in Chang'an. Yi Hongyu walked into the temple. The heavy door of the temple slowly closed behind her. All the subordinates and officials of the divine hall of the kingdom of Qi looked at the closed door in shock. They did not know why the great divine priest had left them outside. Beside the divine chariot at the bottom of the stone steps of the temple, there was a man who was as burly as a mountain. He slowly raised his head and looked at the door. His face was full of hatred. But a moment later, the hatred on his face turned into confusion and fear. Even though the whole world admits that you are the most beautiful woman in Haotian Taoism, you will become a statue if you always pretend to be lonely and hopeless. No matter how beautiful you are, you will still make people feel that you are lifeless. Ning Ke looked at Yi Hongyu and said seriously, "You are more beautiful when you smile. I like to see you smile." Yi Hongyu reached out and took off the jeweled crown from her head and handed it to him. Then she rubbed her sore neck and said, "Can I interpret what you said as flirting?" Ning Ke took the crown and realized that it was indeed very heavy. Thinking that he was holding the crown of the great divine priest of judgment, even he felt a little nervous. He said, "How would I dare to flirt with you?" Yi Hongyu walked into the temple. As she walked, she untied her intricately combed hair. Her long black hair cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall. She looked very relaxed. Ning Ke followed her with the crown in his arms. Yi Hongyu took out a handkerchief from the sleeve of her robe and casually tied up her black hair. Listening to the footsteps behind her, she said, "You have always been the most courageous person in the world. The future divine priest of light has been played with and taught by you every day. Why would you be afraid of flirting with me?" Ning Ke sighed when he heard that. he said, "Speaking of which, the boldest and most presumptuous imagination of my childhood probably did not include marrying a great divine priest of Westhill. Naturally, I did not expect that one day I would hold the crown and talk about such an intimate topic with another great divine priest of Westhill." Yi Hongyu turned to look at him and said expressionlessly, "But I have to warn you. Don't act too intimate with Sang Sang in front of the believers of Haoyan Taoism. Just like before, you said that I look better when I smile. If you said that before the doors of the temple closed, the believers and subordinates outside would definitely think that you are blaspheming Haoyan. Then, even if you are a core disciple of the headmaster of academy, they would still chop you into pieces." Ning Ke said, "Flirting with you is just a habit. As for Sang Sang, she is my wife. Even the hierarch lord has no right to control her. What can your subordinates do to me?" Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and said, "Do you really think so?" Ning Ke thought of the hundreds of papal knights he saw earlier, especially the dozens of judicial priests who were obviously in the see-through state. He could not help but fall silent, especially the burly man beside the sacred sedan. Even though he had entered the knowing destiny state, he could still feel the man's power and even some kind of danger. "Today and tomorrow I need to sort out the details of the plot so that it will be easier for me to break out. So I will write less. Again, from the 16th onwards for the next half a month, please watch my performance. It will be very sustained and powerful. I don't ask for a moment, but we will be together forever." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 540. A man who could make Ning Ke feel threatened must be extraordinarily powerful. At the very least, he must have surpassed the threshold of the knowing destiny state. Such a powerful grand cultivator was only Yi Hongyu's follower. Ning Ke thought of the dozens of see-through state powerhouses walking around the divine sedan of judgment. He was shocked that Haoyan Taoism had hidden such a powerful force, and finally had a clear understanding of Yi Hongyu's power. There were winding corridors and stairs in the white Taoist temple building. The red twilight shone through the stone windows and refracted on the stone steps, giving off a warm aura. Yi Hongyu lifted her blood-red divine robe with both hands, revealing her fair ankles. She did not care that this posture was somewhat indecent and walked up the stone steps. Her movements were light, and her casually tied black hair swayed behind her. She looked like a village girl in the south of the Tang Empire stepping on grapes in a barrel with her long skirt. Ning Ke followed behind her and looked at this scene. He was not intoxicated by the seduction in the whiteness, but he had to admit that it was really beautiful. Whether it was the Tao addict in the past or the great divine priest of judgment now, Yi Hongyu would never show her girlish side in front of her subordinates and believers, nor would she deliberately spread her aura of seduction. She would only show her true self in front of those she truly trusted or those she thought qualified to be her opponent. The most beautiful Taoist girl was now faintly plated with a layer of divinity's brilliance, making her look even more unbearable. However, when she took off the layer of divinity's brilliance and revealed her true self, she looked even more alluring. Ning Ke knew that she was not deliberately seducing him, but he knew that this kind of inadvertent seduction was like a divine robe swaying in the wind, revealing the faintly discernible body underneath. It was the sweetest and most tempting honey. He did not want to taste this kind of honey. He moved his gaze away from Yi Hongyu's back and looked at the priests of the judicial department in the temple. He asked, "Who is that burly man beside the divine sedan?" "Luo Kadi." Yi Hongyu stood on the stone steps and turned around. The hem of her ink-red divine robe spread out with this movement, slightly changing into an oval red flower. It spread out with the wind and then closed up, covering her bare legs. Hearing this name, Ning Ke could not help but be shocked speechless. He had heard of a divine guard commander called Luo Kadi in the Westhill Divine Palace when he was in the academy. He was very powerful and was the hierarch lord's most trusted aide. Yi Hongyu knew what he was thinking just by looking at his expression. She said indifferently, "He is the hierarch's dog. The hierarch did not allow me to kill dogs, so he lent me this dog for a few days. You really have guts." Ning Ke walked up the stone stairs, looked at her and said, "I heard that you once injured him, but I didn't expect that you would dare to keep him by your side. After all, he is a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. If you really push him too hard, he will bite back at you. No matter if he is in the knowing destiny state or an ordinary person, as long as he starts to be a dog, he can only be a dog for the rest of his life. There is no difference between being the hierarch's dog and being my dog. How can a dog dare to rebel against its master? Yi Hongyu looked at Ning Ke and said, speaking of courage, you have the guts to let Sang Sang appear in the kingdom of Qi when the entire Haotian Taoism was unprepared. Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, what do you mean by that? Yi Hongyu turned around and walked into the quiet stone corridor. She said, the former divine priest of light was the most outstanding figure in the Westhill Divine Palace in the past 100 years. Even compared to the divine Lord Lotus, the divine priest of light was not inferior. It was just that he had always kept a low profile and was not willing to show off. Ning Ke thought about it silently. More than 10 years ago, the divine priest of light had stirred up 2 bloody storms in Chang'an and the villages in the Yen territory. How could such a figure not be coquettish? Yi Hongyu knew about his background and did not continue the topic. She said, for decades, the former divine priest of light had trained many capable subordinates in the Westhill Divine Palace. These subordinates either held important positions in the Peach Mountain or were stationed in the temples of the vassal states. Just like the priest in red you have met, the divine priest of light had gained the absolute loyalty of so many people. He could even be compared to the hierarch lord. Ning Ke asked, what does this have to do with Sang Sang? Yi Hongyu slowly stopped and said, the divine priest of light has been imprisoned for more than a decade. These loyal priests have had a hard time in the divine hall. Many of them have been quietly killed and many have been pushed to the edge. What's amazing is that these people's loyalty to the divine priest of light has not changed at all. The divine priest of light was able to escape from the Yu prison and go to Chang, and because of these loyal subordinates. It was a pity that he died with Uncle Yen Sei outside Chang'an. So these loyal subordinates had waited for more than 10 years, but they still could not welcome their spring. Until the whole world knew that the divine priest of light had a successor. She turned to look at Ning Ke and said, there are many people in Haotian Taoism who are fervently waiting for the day that Sang Sang returns to the Westhill Divine Palace. There are also many people who are wary of her return. Originally, the hierarch lord and I thought that since the great divine priest of revelation said that it would happen in 3 years, Ning Ke reminded her, now it is 2 years later. Yi Hongyu continued. The divine hall should have enough time to prepare for Sang Sang's return. However, no one expected that you would let Sang Sang appear in the Taoist hall of the kingdom of Qi so much earlier. So many troubles may come early. Ning Ke frowned slightly and asked, will the return be troublesome? Yi Hongyu said, the successor of the divine priest of light has always been appointed by the previous generation. Even when the great divine priest of light rebelled and founded the devil's doctrine 1,000 years ago, the next great divine priest of light of the Westhill Divine Palace was still appointed by him. Because only light is closest to light. Sang Sang has the inheritance of the previous divine priest of light. So everyone in the Westhill Divine Palace knows that the next great divine priest of light is and can only be her. However, there will always be some people who are not satisfied. Even if they do not dare to do anything disrespectful, they can try some tricks. Ning Ke asked, for example, what kind of tricks? Yi Hongyu said, the Westhill Divine Palace rules all the believers of Haotian in the world. It is the holiest and dirtiest place in the world. It is not surprising that weird things happen there. Ning Ke was silent for a long time when he heard this. Then he said, I don't care what problems there are in Haotian Taoism, and I don't care how dirty it is. But I have to remind you that after Sang Sang goes to the Westhill, no matter if it is the hierarch lord, the great divine priest of revelation, or you have to ensure her safety. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly. She was not happy with his tone. Ning Ke looked at her and said, because she is my wife, and I am a disciple of the academy. If anything happens to her or if she is unhappy, I will be very unhappy. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said mockingly, who are you? Ning Ke said seriously, my second brother likes Sang Sang very much. Yi Hongyu was silent. Ning Ke reached out and patted her shoulder. He did not care what kind of shock it would cause if people outside the Taoism hall saw this. He comforted her and said, of course, the academy will not punish you for no reason. You know that we are not unreasonable people. Yi Hongyu looked up at him and said quietly, I did not expect you to be so shameless even now. But do you really think that Jun Mo's name and the academy's name can scare me? The way I call myself does sound. Ning Ke's voice suddenly stopped because he saw 2 sacred and majestic divine lights burning in the depths of Yi Hongyu's beautiful eyes. The 2 divine lights seemed to come from the divine kingdom and represented the will of the great existence. His consciousness and body suddenly felt an unprecedented fear. He groaned and forced himself to look away. In an instant, his clothes were soaked in cold sweat. He knew that if he had really gone against the divine lights in Yi Hongyu's eyes, his consciousness would have been burned to ashes. He still had lingering fear. Could this be the legendary great divine priest of West Hill's talent? Yi Hongyu walked towards the room in the depths of the stone corridor again. Ning Ke rubbed his eyes and followed her. He complained angrily, "Did you really want to kill me just now?" Yi Hongyu said, "I said at Yanming Lake that the next time we meet, I will kill you." Ning Ke said mockingly, "You also said it in the wilderness. But later on you came to Chang'an to eat and stay with me. I don't see you being embarrassed." Yi Hongyu said, "There will be a time to kill you." Ning Ke frowned and suddenly asked, "Why do you always insist on killing me?" Yi Hongyu said, "Because I hate you. I have never seen someone as shameless as you." Ning Ke said, "There are many people in the world who are more shameless than me. This is not a reason." Yi Hongyu stopped and said after a moment of silence, "Haoyan Taoism and the Academy will eventually fight. I have told you before that among the core disciples of the headmaster of Academy, only you understand what it means to fight. So in the future war, you will be the most dangerous enemy for Haoyan Taoism. That is why I have always wanted to kill you." Ning Ke said, "Should I be proud that the great divine priest of judgment is so wary of me?" Yi Hongyu continued walking and said, "Or sad." Ning Ke said mockingly, "Can you kill me?" Yi Hongyu said matter-of-factly, "Of course." Ning Ke's smile became a little awkward. He insisted and said, "You should be able to see that I am very strong now." Yi Hongyu did not look back and said indifferently, "I am even stronger now." Ning Ke was a little angry and said, "Then do you want to try and kill me now?" At this moment, the two had already walked to the quiet room. Yi Hongyu turned around and looked at him. She said, "I said at Yanming Lake that if I have the chance to kill you in the future, I will spare you once. There are 2 such promises and I have used it today." Ning Ke shook his head firmly and said, "This does not count." Yi Hongyu said, "If I say it counts, then it counts." Ning Ke said, "If I say it doesn't count, then it doesn't count." Yi Hongyu said, "If I say it doesn't count, then it doesn't count." At this moment she suddenly came to her senses. She felt that this conversation was really childish and boring, so she did not continue. Ning Ke pushed open the closed door and said, "Please?" Yi Hongyu looked at Sang Sang who was sleeping on the bed. She looked at her pale face and suddenly said, "Why should I help you?" Ning Ke said, "She is the future great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace." Yi Hongyu said, "She is your wife, not mine." Ning Ke was a little angry. Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, "Don't pretend to be angry in front of me. You know it is useless." Ning Ke suddenly relaxed and asked helplessly, "Then what do you want in return?" Yi Hongyu stretched out a finger and looked at him. She said, "Count it as once." Ning Ke understood that she meant a chance to spare his life. Without hesitation he stretched out his finger and hooked hers. He said, "Deal?" Yi Hongyu tilted her head slightly and looked at their hooked fingers in the air. She seemed to be deep in thought. Then she shook her head and walked into the room. It was late autumn and the sun was setting early. The red twilight was gradually swallowed by the buildings in the capital of the Kingdom of Qi. The priests and knights of the West Hill Divine Palace guarded the White Taoist Temple in silence. They looked at the closed door and thought nervously about what was happening inside. At this moment, a room above the Taoist temple suddenly emitted countless rays of light. It was the pure and holy Haoyan's divine light. It instantly engulfed the window and then slowly descended. The sun had already set. A new morning sun rose in the capital of the Kingdom of Qi. The people outside the Taoist temple felt the majesty and love in the divine light. They all knelt on the ground. Those who saw the morning sun in the twilight, whether it was the imperial concubine of the Kingdom of Qi in the palace or the devout believers in the slums, all knelt in that direction and prayed in awe. From tomorrow onwards, prepare to die. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.